Several years ago, I found myself in Livingstone in Scotland. I just happened to be there for a few days in a hotel with my sister and brother-in-law. While there, I went on a few dating and hookup sites just to see who was in the area. I didn't intend to actually meet up with anyone whilst there, as I'd put that on my profile. I put it on there that I was only looking to chat and make friends. On the day before we were due to leave, I went into one of the hookup apps, Grindr, and received a message from someone. We got chatting for a while and he was very charming and sweet, a hairdresser from Edinburgh, and while chatting and getting to know each other, I decided to hit the hay. The following morning I received a message from him asking if I wanted to meet up for some fun in the bedroom. I told him I couldn't as we were leaving that day, and it had been stated on my profile that I wasn't meeting anyone while in Scotland. He started becoming abusive, saying that I was a time waster and saying sexual things of what he could have done to me had we met, but that I wouldn't have the chance. Most of it was just insults and swears, so I told him that if he didn't stop, I would report him and block him. He didn't stop, so I reported him and blocked him. Fast forward to the last few years, and the guy I had spoken to was in the news. He had been using the app to lure victims so that he could sleep with them, but tampered with the condoms so that he could purposefully infect them with HIV. I thank the lucky stars that I decided not to meet anyone. His 10 known victims could have easily ended up being 11. I worked in a hospital for 7 years. Pretty old and outdated original building with newer additions. I was about to use the set of elevators that are sandwiched in between the old building and the new addition. I get on, push the button to go up a floor or two and everything's fine. Until the elevator starts going down instead of up. I just figured someone called the elevator before I hit the button on my floor, which happens sometimes because they pretty much operated by who pushed it first, you know. Well, the elevator takes me down to the basement level, which is the oldest part of the hospital and happened to house the morgue. Doors open, nobody's there to have called the elevator. Figured whatever, maybe they were impatient and went another way or something. I tried pushing the closed door buttons and nothing happened. The elevator just sat there with the doors open on the basement level. The floor I selected was still lit, but I tried pushing a different floor above us. It lit up just like intended, but it wasn't working. I waited and mashed the buttons for at least 5 minutes, and the doors the whole while stayed open and didn't move, which was unheard of for those doors to stay open. They didn't even have a service switch where you can push to lock the doors open when needed, let alone for the elevator not to be called. It was a commonly used elevator that was always in movement. I decided that it must have broken down and that I didn't have time for this. Well, as soon as I step out the elevator, the doors shut, and the elevator leaves to go to the floors I selected. Something really wanted me to visit them in the basement that night, and wouldn't take no for an answer. My dad bought a house in 1965, for what he said was a steal at the time. It was built around the 1920s and was huge, around 4,200 square feet in the West Hills, with an amazing view right below the Pittock Mansion. He never knew why it was so cheap, but didn't ask too many questions. The house was great, except that the basement would flood in the winter with rainwater. His first marriage ended in the early 70s, and he remained single for a few years. During this time, he claims the FBI came to the house and asked him some questions about the basement. He told me they said a woman was found in the garage just before he bought it, and they assumed that she'd taken her own life, and he thought that must be why the house was so cheap. He told them it was empty when he moved in. He let them in and they searched the basement, and he recalls they wouldn't tell him much, but the neighbors told him that the previous owners were involved in mischief, with lots of parties, fancy cars coming in and out at all hours, and they would hang out at Henry Thiel's, a local restaurant, but more about that in a moment. He married my mother in 1974, having me and my brother. In high school, I remember some men coming and saying something about Henry Thiel's being torn down, and they wanted to look in the basement. They said they were the FBI. My parents let them in and explained it had been remodeled to fix the water issue. I left to go somewhere and don't know what else they spoke about, and didn't think much of it until years later. As I was growing up, my dad's 4 other kids who are much older than me moved out while I was very little, college, etc. His 2 boys sometimes stayed with us in the summer, the girls did not. Mum and I always assumed the girls didn't like us. In the 80s, when I was around 10, my mum started having dreams about a shadowy male creature that would hover over her at night. She would wake up and it would still be there. She'd scream, fight, swing at it, and it wouldn't go away until Dad woke up. She would crawl to the foot of the bed, and it would follow her, keeping its face to hers and disappear only when Dad sat up. Side note, the floor plan of the house was very interesting, with a master wing, a single door that led to a hallway with separate rooms, a bathroom and a bedroom, and a small hallway that could be locked. As well as each of the 3 rooms, the garage shared a wall along the master bedroom. A windowless attic above the garage shared a wall with the 2 upstairs bedrooms. My parents discovered that if the door leading to the hallway was locked, and the master bedroom at the end of the hallway was locked, she would not have this dream. My dad tested this on occasion, sometimes purposefully and sometimes accidentally. They both swear 100% of the time, if just one door was left unlocked at any time before the morning, she would have the experience. It had to remain locked when someone left the room, or opened very briefly to go down the short hallway to the bathroom at night, being locked behind them as they left with a key. The key could not remain in the door lock, and yes, of course, they were old-fashioned styled skeletal keys. My extremely pacifist father also began keeping an axe under his side of the bed. Through the 80s, my mum went back to work and hired a living nanny, who happened to be a woman. They would never work for us long. Their reasons were always vague, but they would always complain about the creepy house. We assumed they were being nice, as my brother was special needs, and care was extremely challenging, and assumed they didn't want to say mean things about him. When I was a teenager, with this habit well established of locking doors, my aunt came to stay with us after having surgery. One morning she apologized to my mum about how she must have woken up the entire house. She recounted the exact same experience. She awoke to a dark figure that she was absolutely sure was male, hovering above her. It remained there, and didn't leave until she was exhausted from screaming. The guest room she stayed in bordered the garage. She had the experience every night until she left, and never returned. As adults, my sisters and I became friends. Years ago, with me in my 30s and one of my sisters in her 40s, were having drinks talking about the good old days, and I told her about the experience, as it had been shared with me over the years by women on my mum's side. I'll never forget her face. She kept looking at her husband and back at me, while I had told her what I heard. When I was done, with a very pale face, she recounted her own stories. She told me how her mum had the exact same experience, and others. Her mum used to put tape under the chairs in the dining room at night, with numbers written on them. She would check the chairs and find them out of order. She would reorganize them, and find them moved the next day. The chairs were not scattered, just reorganized, but still tucked in. Children didn't play in the dining room, and claimed to have never moved the chairs. My sister told me of her own Shadow Man story. She and her sister had the exact same experience. Her husband couldn't believe it either, as she had told him, and it was why they would never visit Dad or stay at the house until he retired or moved. Her husband always assumed it was just some teenage nightmares and nonsense. The bedroom the sisters shared bordered the upstairs attic part of the garage. A small, almost half door led from the attic over the garage into their bathroom. The bathroom had 2 doors, one to the hallway and one to the nanny/guest bedroom, and another to the sister's bedroom. If the bathroom door or bedroom door were left unlocked, they would see the shadow man. A few years back, my wife and I were in Portland and decided to go by the old house. I knocked on the door, and the owner answered and was nice enough to let us in. They had remodeled, and she very nicely toured us through the entire house, and they'd done a lot of work. She seemed to enjoy showing it off. Eventually we went upstairs, and the small attic door to the garage was gone. A solid wall was in its place. I tapped the wall and asked, "How do you get to the attic?" The woman looked at me confused. I told her, "There's a hallway behind this wall. It goes over the master bedroom and into the attic and into the garage. The room is a good 20 by 30 feet, you can't miss it." She insisted there was no room. I assured her there was, and told her how my brother and I would play in there and keep our Christmas stuff, old clothes and furniture. She got very skittish and then told us she needed to get going and so we'd have to go. We hurried out, but she was very polite, but clearly didn't want to keep talking. When we left, I looked up, and you could see the hallway leading to the garage was still there. The siding of the house was clearly laid out for a hallway and a large room connected to the garage. It was easily 600 to 700 square feet of hall and attic they walled off, and I can only assume to end the experience with the Shadow Man. I'd really like to go back and see if anyone else has had any weird experiences. I would say I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe there is something very strange in that house. I looked on Zillow and it changed hands again. I wonder if anyone will discover and reopen the attic once more. This incident took place in 2023, when I stayed in a chalet with my family for one night. This chalet is not in Changi nor Pasir Ris, and nowhere near the east side of Singapore. I'm not going to disclose the location either. There are a few villas that we could choose, but we picked just the normal villa since it was just one night. We reached there around 1 PM, and to be honest, I already felt weird. The villa that was given to us was far from the other villas, and it was beside this forested area. For some strange reason, my grandmother immediately said this when we arrived. If you see or hear anything, don't say anything. Even though it was weird to me, it's sort of normal for Malay families to say this, because we don't want to attract the attention of those things. We started to decorate the chalet for my sister's birthday party, setting up the balloons and unpacking our stuff. At 4 PM, some of our cousins started coming for the party, and my mum realized we didn't have enough ice for all the guests. So I was tasked to go to the nearby supermarket to buy the ice. When I was leaving the chalet, I had to walk through the car park, and there was this man standing there looking at my villa. I didn't have any thoughts, so I just walked towards him since I had to walk past him to leave the compound. When I walked past, he asked me if my family was staying there and I simply nodded. He said to me, "Be careful, the place is quite active if you know what I mean." I got creeped out, so I faked a smile and made my way. When I came back with the ice packs, I noticed the man was now looking into the bushes behind the villa, and was just acting weird, but I still chose to ignore him. We had a total of 15 to 20 people there at around 7 PM, and everyone was having fun, nothing scary or whatever. That's when the same man materialized again. I was at the barbecue with one of my cousins while the rest of our relatives were inside enjoying the aircon and chit-chatting. He approached us at the barbecue and said, "Don't stay outside too long, there are graves here." What? We just thought he was a psycho and chose to join the family inside to be safe. Still nothing happened and the guests went home at around midnight. My grandma, parents, siblings and I had watched up at around half midnight, and I was the last one since I was still eating the catered food. I totally forgot about the psycho guy and was eating alone outside near the barbecue pit. That's when the disturbance started. I heard someone calling me in the bushes that the man had pointed at. Psst, psst. Initially I ignored it, but suddenly I heard a faint cry from the same direction. That was the last straw, and I ran up to the bedroom to sleep without even washing up. Thankfully, nothing else happened to me that night, but when we researched the home, that was when everyone started sharing their experiences. My grandma said she saw a woman staring at us in the forested area when we first reached it, and that's the reason she said what she said. She described the woman as a faceless being. My mum then said that when she was showering, she heard the same faint cry as me, but around the same time. Nothing happened to my siblings, but my dad shared that when he went to smoke near the forested area, he constantly felt someone caressing his hair, and when he left, he heard someone call out his name. After that day, my family decided we would no longer book that chalet anymore. First and last time. I'm a 25-year-old man who works in a small town and works at the daycare center. Today, when a kid of 4 years old was dropped off, their mother turned to me and asked, "Who's Christopher?" And taken aback, I turned to her and asked, what was she talking about? It was only the normal kids that come here, and with it being a small town, I knew she knew every kid there. She looked at me and said that her child said there was someone new here named Christopher. I told her no, and we both laughed it off and she left. Later on, I asked the kid who Christopher was. They got really bashful and shyly said he was a boy that was here and is really shy and wasn't shy around them, and that he was only here when I wasn't. Now I understand that kids can be kids and could be seeing imaginary friends, but the part that I get concerned about is that he's only here when I'm not. I'm not saying it's a ghost, but I'm also well aware of the fact that younger children can see things adults can't. Not trying to be egotistical or anything. I'm a practicing pagan and have spent a lot of energy protecting myself from bad spiritual stuff, essentially. So I do find it concerning that something that only wants to communicate with a child doesn't want to be here when I'm not. So I ask you, do you think it's a ghost or an imaginary friend? It's been a bit since that all happened. Never got around to talking to the other kids to see if they'd seen Christopher as well. But the idea that the building is haunted hasn't left my mind. So the usual routine for the kids is just snack in the morning, play until lunch, have lunch, and then put the kids down for nap. Today I took my lunch an hour later than I usually do, which I usually do before the kids go for nap time. But this time it meant I was there to put the kids down for nap, and I left after most of them had gone to sleep. When I got back, there were a few kids awake, with the other workers there. And after a while, we got the few kids that were awake to start colouring, and where we had them colouring, you could clearly see the door to the room in which the rest of the kids were napping. On this day we had 8 kids, which is about the usual for us seeing how small the town daycare is. At the time we had 4 kids awake and 4 kids still napping. While drawing, I was facing the door, so I could see when a kid came out after waking up. After a while I saw the door open, not fully open, but come out of the latch, and so I got up to see which kid it was. When I walked around to see, I could see a child's face peering through the small crack in the door, but almost as soon as I saw this, the door quickly closed. I laughed it off, as just one of the kids messing around, and went to go check which kid it was. When I went to open the door, it felt as if the doorknob was being held on the other side, but it was just the slightest feeling, so it didn't require any more than normal effort, but still had the feeling. When I opened the door, I expected to see one of the kids standing behind it because of that feeling I had. But when I peered into the room, every kid in there was still asleep. I don't know whose face I saw in the door, not because it wasn't one of the kids, but because when I think back on it, I feel like the face was almost barren, like there wasn't any actual look to it. But the way the door closed almost as soon as I made eye contact with it is still kind of terrifying. I worked for 2 years in an old house built in 1915 that had been converted into an office. This is a historic town out in the west of the US that is a tourist destination. We call this the admin house, where around 12 people worked, which was for a larger company in the region. People's schedules were not consistent, so you'd often find yourself alone in the house or with a few others. However, we didn't like being alone in the house due to it being haunted. I have the belief that the spirit of a woman still dwells there. The CEO's office was the hotspot, and sometimes the basement too. Activity usually happened in the early morning or late afternoon when you were alone, or only a few people were in the office. I would be working at my computer in the quiet admin's house and hear a deep inhale and dramatic sigh of a woman coming from the CEO's office. Sometimes the sound of the chair being moved or paper shuffling would accompany the sighs. Knowing the CEO was not in the office, I'd get chills every time this happened. I'd get up and look in the office, finding nobody there. Sometimes, papers would be scattered on the floor. Other employees started taking notice of these strange happenings. The HR lady once came up from the basement, asking if anyone just came down there. She heard the basement door open and close, then heard a woman give out a big sigh. Getting up to look, she found no one there. None of us went into the basement who were there working at the time. Some of the more bizarre happenings were once when I had to come into the office alone on a Sunday to finish up a report due the following day. After a few minutes logging into my computer, I began hearing opera music. However, the music sounded like it was being played on an old phonograph with scratchy noises. I thought it was coming from outside and continued working. After a few minutes of the music stopping and then returning, I suddenly realized it was coming from the CEO's office. Weirded out, I get up and walk towards the office. As I'm approaching the office, the music's getting louder and I hear a woman sigh. Just as I hear the sigh, the music abruptly stops. I look in the office and it's empty. The CEO's computer isn't even in the room, since she took it home. One last encounter I will share was when it was just me and the CEO in the office. The CFO is coming out of the bathroom when she responds to someone calling her name from the CEO's office. The CFO goes into the CEO's office and then comes out with a freaked out look on her face. No one was there, but a woman audibly called her name. It was just the two of us in the office. This experience both creeped us out enough to make us be done for the day and leave the house. My wife and I had moved into our old house in New England in summer of 2000. We had looked at dozens of houses, but this one immediately felt like home. Soon after, we invited our good friends, James and his husband, up for the weekend. Keep James and his husband in mind. We were pretty well into getting our late night party on, playing cards, drinking and smoking in the dining room. When out of the corner of my eye, I perceived a very vividly older woman with jet black hair sitting next to the old upright piano in the corner. The piano came with the house. We specifically requested that the previous owners included in the sale because it was so cool, and we didn't have much furniture. It wasn't even slightly scary. It was just like she was hanging out. I mentioned it to everyone and laughed it off. Drinking and fun continued through the night. I was never really a ghost believer and still an 100% skeptic, but the rest of the story really makes me wonder. Several weeks later, we met a neighbor from down the street who lived in the neighborhood 45 years. "You live in the Muriel King house," she tells us. Muriel was a really interesting lady. She was a famous fashion designer in the 1930s that lived there alone after her husband took his own life. Very tragic, but she was a very interesting lady, very independent and ahead of her time. She traveled all over the world. She was Greek, I think. "Greek?" I ask. Weird question, but did she have black hair? Yes, she had jet black hair. Even when she was an old woman, it was very striking. I got the chills at that moment. Many weeks later, I met another neighbor from down the street that had lived there for over 60 years and started telling me about Muriel. She was a famous fashion designer. She designed gowns for Rita Hayworth, all the classic film stars, even designed costumes for Broadway plays too. Her parties were legendary, he told me. She used to have all her gay boyfriends from Broadway come up here on the train and they'd drink and sing, show tunes at the piano in the dining room all night long. Yep. Now this could have all been coincidental, but it just seemed too much so. But she must have been an awesome woman. People from all around have given us some of her original drawings and even an unfinished dress she was working on. There haven't been any more Muriel sightings, but shortly after my wife got pregnant 20 years ago, we both woke up out of a cold sleep at the same time and looked at each other, and our bedroom door slammed hard. We like to think that Muriel wasn't a fan of kids. She never had any of her own. So she was like, "Later, y'all. I'm out." We all make dumb decisions in life, but in this case, I was stupid. Very stupid. I arranged to meet a guy off Tinder, but because of my heightened anxiety about driving, I arranged for him to pick me up outside my place. I had been talking to him for a few weeks at least, but that is not redeemable and I know that. The choice I made on this day could have ended me, but thankfully I'm still around to share the tale with all of you. The guy picked me up in his car and told me he planned to take us out for sushi. I love sushi, so I thought great. He put in the name of the restaurant into his GPS and we were off, making pleasant conversation on the way until I started seeing woods. Then I looked out the window. I felt very confused. We're supposed to be going into town, not the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. Fear then hit me hard. I swear the GPS has taken me through here. I didn't choose this path. Can we just get back to civilization? My eyes were wide, and I must have looked like a deer in headlights. His face was really apprehensive, so he must have known that I was scared out my mind. Oh my God, I thought to myself. I should have just conquered my anxiety about driving and met him somewhere public. Or better yet, not gone with this guy at all. What the hell was I thinking? I'm gonna get murdered here in these woods. I tried checking on my phone to see if I could assist him with the GPS. And that's when he said those spine-chilling words. "Oh, there's no signal out here, love." I remember just thinking to myself to try and look calm. Don't let him suspect you're onto something. But man, did I feel terrified. The tips of my fingers were cold while I was simultaneously sweating. If he was going to kill me, part of me wanted him to get it over and done with so I wouldn't be left in anticipation. His forehead was perspiring. He kept saying, "I swear I'm not doing this. I'm just trying to get us back en route to the sushi place." I don't care about sushi anymore. Get me to a gas station, anywhere with people at this point. I don't have a shovel or weapon in my trunk or anything if that's what you're thinking. Which did little to calm my nerves. We finally reached the restaurant after what felt like an eternity, and I'd never been more scared in my life. I didn't have much of an appetite and I was physically trembling when we arrived. But I reasoned he didn't kill me when he had the chance, so I guess it was safe to continue with our date. I already planned on taking an Uber home because I didn't want to go through that experience again, and was shocked out my mind when he asked, "So when do you think we'll be able to do it?" I nearly choked on a piece of sashimi. What? I didn't know when this was coming from, and I didn't know how he could ask me something like this now on a first date, when he literally saw me pale as a ghost just moments before. You know, like, how long will it take for you to sleep with me? A day? A week? A month? I stared at him dumbfounded. I couldn't respond because of how utterly speechless I was in that moment. "Well, I can't wait a whole month, I'm telling you now," he said. I didn't say anything, and for the rest of the date I was insanely awkward. I said goodbye as I took my Uber home, and only seconds after my driver pulled out the restaurant parking lot, he messaged me to say that he doesn't think it will work out because he needs a girl with a higher libido. I didn't argue, just text back a simple okay, ready to be done with the man. When the Uber driver took me home, he did not take me through the wilderness pathway of a potential murder site. He took me home through streets, other cars, lights, and the sweetest scene to my immense relief. I couldn't help but wonder why my date had taken me an hour drive through the wilderness to get to a restaurant that in Uber only took 15 minutes. The whole thing was chilling. I don't know if my date planned on anything sinister or if it was an honest mistake, but I'm glad I made it out alive. I learned a lot that night. One that I really should have already known, that I foolishly ignored for some reason. Don't let strangers from dating apps pick you up in their car from your house. So to the guy that took me through the woods, let's never meet again. My grandmother lived with my parents and I for nearly my entire life. She passed away in her connected basement apartment in 2020. She raised me, so losing her has been very hard. We have noticed some odd things happening in the basement. My sister went down there once, and one of her old clown figurines randomly fell off a shelf. One time I was sitting down there, and all of the ornaments on the Christmas tree just started shaking. I tried speaking to a photo of her on the wall once as a sort of therapy, and the picture illuminated in a sort of way. The time that sticks with me the most was New Year's Eve 2020. I couldn't go anywhere because of the pandemic, so I stayed up late playing video games. I had work very early the next morning, but I kept playing, and I thought to myself that I should go to bed soon, but oh well. Just after that thought came into my head, my game shut off, and I got an error message that I'd never received before and haven't gotten since. Immediately I went to bed. She's still parenting me from beyond the grave. When I was younger, I used to experience a reoccurring dream that was quite unsettling. In the dream, I felt as if someone was placing me in my car seat. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to it, so I remained half asleep, aware of my surroundings as I moved around the house. I could sense myself being taken towards the kitchen and then down the stairs until I was eventually set down in the basement. Upon opening my eyes, I found myself facing towards my sister's room in the basement. Being a little kid, I got easily scared, so I did what any frightened child would do and went back to sleep and woke up in bed the next day. This strange occurrence repeated for a while, though I'm not sure for how long exactly. One day while being carried, I managed to open my eyes and found myself facing the stairs. Uncomfortable with what was happening, I quickly closed my eyes and opened them up again as I reached the basement. As usual, I went back to sleep and woke up in my bed. I couldn't understand why this had kept happening, but one night when I was up late with my sister, I heard a baby's cry coming from the bottom of the stairs. It made me think back through the years, and I realized why I ended up in the basement. I was just a little kid, only 4.5, and it occurred to me that the spirit mistook me for a baby and placed me where the deceased baby had been. It crossed my mind that perhaps it wanted me to suffer the same fate as the baby. It's heartbreaking to know that such a young life was lost. I never told my parents about this, just my 2 sisters. I'm not actually sure if it was a baby who passed away here. I have no way of finding out, but I just sort of assumed it from the sound. There was a very strong feeling that night, telling me something was about to happen. I felt like I was being watched by a woman, and that at any moment she was going to tap on my shoulder. My brain was thinking of the word queen. I don't know why, but it felt like this woman, whoever she was highly respected in any case. I'm a 20-year-old female, but when this happened to me, I was 16. It still gives me chills when I think about it. At the time, I had been living in a very rural part of Tennessee, going to high school in one of the smallest towns in the state. This was one of those very old-fashioned small Baptist Christian towns where everyone knows everyone. When I say it was old-fashioned, I mean the church on every corner, the cemetery and the front lawn of the high school kind. Moving there after spending the first 15 years of my life in Evergreen, Colorado, was akin to traveling 40 years back in time. And in time, I grew to love the little town and all of the people I met and connected with. One of these people was a wonderful girl my age called Dee Dee. She and I became very close over that school year, and I would often spend time at her house, gossiping, eating snacks, watching horror movies, and just doing all of the things best friends do. I truly look back on our friendship fondly, and I miss her a lot. Before I tell you about what happened to me, I need to give you some context. I've always enjoyed collecting old things, and one of my favorite hobbies is poking around antique shops and collecting whichever pretty old things my goblin brain desires. One of my favorite things to collect are porcelain dolls. There is something so hauntingly beautiful about them. I have several around my apartment still, and even some in the room with me as I'm writing this now. Judge all you want. I love the way they look. Dee Dee's grandmother had passed down her own collection of beautiful porcelain dolls to her and her mother, and they kept these dolls in the closet of her mother's room. When I mentioned to Dee Dee that I collected porcelain dolls, she excitedly took me to the closet and showed me her grandmother's old treasures. There were two dolls in particular that really caught my eye. There was a doll with pretty blonde hair wearing a white and blue dress, and another doll with curly blonde hair in a frilly white dress, sitting in her own mini rocking chair. Later in our visit, Dee Dee and her mother told me stories about how the doll in the rocking chair was supposedly haunted, and that's why it was kept in the corner of the closet and out of sight. I thought this was interesting, but I'm not overly sensitive to the paranormal, so I didn't think much of it. I explained that people tend to think of porcelain dolls as haunted because of horror movies like Annabelle, and of course because of the uncanny valley effect. If you don't know what that is, it's basically that people feel uncomfortable when they look at something that appears almost human but not quite. That's why certain animation/art styles will freak people out. Anyway, Dee Dee and her mother were quick to offer me the doll, saying that if I wasn't afraid and wanted to add it to my collection, that I was more than welcome. I was of course delighted and took the doll in the rocking chair home with me. They also gave me the other doll in the blue and white dress, simply because they weren't going to display her. Before I left Dee Dee's house, her mother told me that if I, for some reason, needed to get rid of the doll in the rocking chair, that I ought to bring it straight back to them, instead of throwing it away or destroying it, because it was her grandmother's, and it did have sentimental value. I assured her that I would take good care of the doll, and when I arrived home, I placed both dolls proudly on my shelf of little knickknacks and other dolls I'd collected. Fast forward to that night. I'm suddenly awoken from a dead sleep, and my eyes lock with the dolls in the rocking chair. Wondering what had awoken me, I realize I'm neither able to move or speak, and for some reason I can't break eye contact with the doll in the rocking chair. I've experienced sleep paralysis before. It's pretty common in people with chronic anxiety, but never did I experience an auditory or visual hallucination. That being said, as I'm trapped, gazing into the eyes of the doll, I'm suddenly surrounded by what sounds like hundreds of children's echoing laughter. I lay there, unable to move for what felt like several minutes, while the sound of children's laughter echoed all around me. Finally, the laughter began to fade away, and when the sound finally died out, I was able to move and look away from the doll. I quickly sat up in bed, went over to the shelf, and turned the doll so that she was facing away from me, making a mental note to take the doll back to Dee Dee's house first thing in the morning. I told Dee Dee and her mother about my experience and explained that I wanted them to have the doll back. Instead of being frightened, they simply gave me a bemused look, as if to say, "We told you so." In our turbulent time together in Kentucky, my ex and I grappled with a strained relationship, marked by her frequent declarations that she could find someone better, and her constant references to exes who seemed ever present in her life. The atmosphere was charged with tension, to say the least, but on one particular day things took a bizarre and frightening turn. As we sat on the couch just watching TV, an unexpected shift occurred when out of nowhere she turned towards me, her face wearing a blank expression that sent chills down my spine. It was in that moment the person beside me felt like a complete stranger, triggering an unsettling wave of fear. Suddenly she seized me by the throat, her eyes void of recognition, attacking me as though possessed by an inexplicable force. The struggle intensified when she reached for a nearby hammer, her intentions chillingly clear. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to wrestle the hammer from her grasp, prompting an immediate transformation from aggression to retreat. She hid away, leaving me bewildered and questioning my role as the supposed antagonist. Seeking answers, I asked her about the inexplicable episode, only to be met with tearful confusion and the unsettling admission that she had no idea. I was very frightened by the ordeal and found myself waiting for her to fall asleep or hiding in the bathroom for most of the night. It's only when she finally fell asleep that I ventured out and slept on the couch. The next morning, I made the decision to leave. What made the situation even more scary was that she had displayed no signs of mental illness before this nightmarish incident. The trust in our relationship had been shattered, leaving me quite traumatized and haunted by the fear of the unforeseen lurking beneath the surface. As it turns out, her unsettling behavior didn't end with me. She swiftly relocated to Illinois and did the same thing to another guy. My grandfather moved into a lake house in the US. He lives in a not old but not so new 2-story house with a basement and 4 bedrooms. His house has always creeped me out since the beginning, really. It wasn't that the house looked bad or was in poor condition. It was just that my brain had set itself into fight or flight the moment I passed its threshold. I told myself to quit being a wuss and explore the house, and brushed it off as being nervous. It was a new house in a new city after all, and was much further from his original house in the woods. A good 2 hours probably. I checked the upstairs out and calmed myself down a little bit, while my sister ran off to play with my cousins. I finished looking around the first half of his house and made my way down the stairs towards the basement. It was a fully finished basement, but even with lights, it still felt poorly lit and dark, with uninviting corners. I opened the doors and peeked into all the rooms until one was left in the downstairs living room, the game room. This room was meant for storage and had no windows. Every time someone walked upstairs, you could hear very loud creaking from the bare wooden boards above your head. The lights were a blinding white when on, but as soon as you'd flick the switch, it was pure darkness. If you were to put your right hand in front of your face, you'd not be able to see it. The game room had multiple metal shelves and game boxes laying everywhere. To finish it off, there was a large ping-pong table right smack dab in the middle of the carpet. Being alone in the basement all by myself made me really jumpy, and my senses were all on high alert. A barely audible scratching noise had emitted from the storm room. The longer I sat there, the louder it got, until it exited the room quickly and closed the door behind me. It was impossible for anyone else to be in the room with me. Everyone else was upstairs, and if someone were to enter, I would have heard the creaking above my head. It was creepy as hell. Another time during the summer, when the lake water was warm, my cousin, my sister and I stayed the night to go swimming the next day. We jokingly spoke about how creepy the house was and how funny it would be if a ghost was in the basement. All 3 of us decided to bunk out in the king-size bed in the guest room downstairs. After a while of giggling and pestering, all of us said our goodnights and cuddled up to sleep. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps outside my room. My grandfather had probably come to check in on us, I thought. Then to my horror, I heard loud snoring from the master bedroom. In fact, It wasn't him. I shook my cousin and sister awake to listen, and they all agreed they heard walking too. My eyes made their way back to the bottom of the door, staring at the little crack. You could visibly see feet shuffling back and forth. Before I could gasp, the feet stopped right in front of our bedroom door, and I held my breath and laid there too terrified to move. They stayed like that for God knows how long, and after a while they began moving back and forth again. It got worse. Soft tapping from the wall behind our bed started up. It was as if someone on the opposite side of the wall was flicking their knuckles against the thin plaster that separated the bedroom from the storm room. All of us hid under our covers and didn't say a word, eventually all passing out from exhaustion. In the morning while sitting at breakfast, I questioned my grandfather about last night, and he told me he had not gotten up to check on us, and that he had turned the TV off upstairs and went straight to bed. All of us kids glanced at each other, saying nothing, and continued to shove syrupy pancakes into our cheeks. The very last time I had ever experienced something strange in this house was during late summer, with my sister and multiple other cousins. There were around 6 of us. All of us wanted to play hide and seek in his large house, and, as I was the eldest, I was seeking first. One by one I found all my cousins. The only person left was my sister, and all my cousins had agreed to help me search for her around the house. I tried looking in the closet again in the basement, but it was glued shut. In frustration, I began rattling it, trying to pry the door open. I couldn't remember if I had a lock on or not. I loudly knocked on the door and ordered my sister to come out since I'd found her. After 20 seconds of silence, I tried again. By now I was beginning to become pissed off. All 4 cousins joined in helping me open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Making our way upstairs to ask my grandfather to open the door, my sister jumped out from behind a vase and scared us all. I angrily asked her why she locked the door to the closet, and she gave me a confused look and informed me she had no clue what I was talking about, and that she had been in her current hiding spot the whole time. She laughed as she bragged about us walking past her at least 5 different times, but stopped after watching the colour all drain from our face. Only then did she understood what happened. Every time we stay over at my grandfather's, we always bring up stories and talk about them. All of my cousins believe his basement, if not the whole house, is haunted. What do you think? I once encountered a chilling presence in the form of a tall, shadowy figure. This unsettling episode took place a while ago, when I resided in a house that bore a dark history, where 3 individuals had met tragic ends within their walls, their bodies concealed in the attic and stored there for 6 years, until the previous owner discovered them. Well, one night, as I lay in bed exhausted from a day of outdoor play, an eerie sensation crept over me. It felt as if something was watching me from the right corner of my room. Despite my fatigue, I drifted off to sleep. Later, in the deep darkness that signaled midnight, I awoke to an inexplicable terror that paralyzed me. Struggling to move, I was overcome with an indescribable fear that was entirely new to me. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I discerned a towering figure, roughly 7 feet tall, looming over me, adorned with a colossal top hat. The figure emanated an otherworldly aura. Panic surged, and my attempts to call for my parents proved futile. My voice seemed to have abandoned me, leaving only tears in its wake. The enigmatic being continued to stare, and bewilderingly vanished without a trace into the enveloping darkness. Upon regaining my ability to speak, I summoned my parents, recounting the inexplicable encounter. However, they dismissed it as a mere nightmare, asserting that no one could have been inside the house. A decade passed, and at 16 we moved into a spacious home with expansive grounds, and despite its grandeur, a sense of foreboding lingered. One night after a gaming session, I went to bed, where a disconcerting feeling gnawed at me, nestled in the recesses of my chest. Ignoring the unease, I closed my eyes only to be jolted awake by a whisper and deep breath coming from the corner of my room. Once again I found myself immobilized, as if I focused on the ominous presence. The same figure materialized, 7 feet tall, sporting a distinctive hat. Closing my eyes tightly, I felt a weight descend upon my chest, accompanied by a fervent prayer for reprieve. Miraculously, the figure disappeared, leaving me shaken and compelled to keep the lights on throughout the night. When morning arrived, I confided in my father, who revealed he had sensed something amiss in my childhood, but refrained from telling me to not alarm me. The encounters persisted in my nightmares, occurring almost monthly, until our eventual relocation due to my parents' divorce. Remarkably, since that move, I have been spared from these haunting dreams. Sharing this unnerving experience serves as a testament that others may find solace knowing that they are not alone in facing this inexplicable phenomena. During my freshman and sophomore years of college, I was extremely awkward. I had just come out as gay and didn't have any friends, and I was just generally being a big wad of social anxiety. Given that I didn't even have the social skills to make friends, it's not surprising that I also had literally no dating experience. Miraculously, over the course of the summer after sophomore year, I sort of grew out of the worst of my awkwardness. I lost some weight, had a lot more confidence in myself, and my self-esteem was a lot higher. I came back to school in August, and by October, I had a decent number of genuine friends, and had gotten a lot more involved on campus. With my newfound confidence, I decided I'd finally download Grindr and see what it was like. For anyone who doesn't know, Grindr is a dating app that's primarily used for finding sex and hookups for gay people. Despite my recent improvement in the social arena, I was still extremely naive and inexperienced when it came to dating. I set up my Grindr profile with a nice picture of myself and a very brief bio, and I got a lot of messages very quickly after my picture was approved. One guy who messaged me with the display name of Dad4Young, which should have been my first red flag, but I was oblivious. I should note that I looked really young for my age. At the time I was 21, but was regularly asked by campus staff in which middle school or high school I was visiting from. I'm 23 now, and still get asked if I want a kids menu if I go to restaurants with my parents. It's that bad. So Dad4Young sends me a message that says, "What's up?" And I reply without looking at his profile first. Then I look at his profile and notice he's 54. His only profile text says, "The younger, the better." And it was a zoomed in picture of a hairy chest. So I was not very interested. But given my inexperience, I thought ignoring him would be terribly rude, so I kept on replying. I don't totally remember what we spoke about, maybe 10 or so messages we exchanged at first, but I do remember him telling me that I was very cute. I told him I was a student, but I never mentioned to which college I went to. It's important to note that I went to college in a major city, and there are a bunch of different colleges all within like 5 miles of each other, and a few more within those 10 miles. So, sort of like Tinder, Grindr works off your location, but much more precisely. If you're less than a mile or two away from someone who's online, it will display the distance in feet. I noticed that Dad4Young's profile said he was 25 miles away, which I thought was kinda far. Dad4Young started getting more sexual in his chats and asked if I wanted to meet up. I felt bad flat out denying him since he'd been so polite, so I told him I didn't want to meet up with him that day, but that we could keep talking if he wanted. I figured that was that, and when I checked 20 minutes later, it said he was offline. Nope. About half hour later, I get another message from him. "Hey Wade, I got a wild idea. and thought I'd take a nice drive out to Frobisher College. I had not told him the name of my college, nor had I told him what part of town I was in. I looked at his profile, and it now said he was 3 miles away. I started freaking out a little, and didn't reply to his messages in the hopes he would leave me alone. It's important to note that my college has a couple of different campuses, separated by a few miles. I lived on the upperclassmen residential campus, which is about 2 miles from the main campus where all of the other student dorms and main buildings are. I felt like he was going to try and find me. He'd go to the main campus first, then maybe give up, since not many outside people know about the separate residential campus. 5 or 6 minutes later, I get another message saying something like, "No fun if you don't play along. What building are you in?" His profile says he's a little over 2,500 feet away, and every time I reopened his profile, the distance would decrease. I was fully losing my mind at this point, since the guy had the ability to pinpoint my location, so I shut my blinds and turned off my light, locked my window and door to the apartment and bedroom door. My roommate was also out of town on some kind of retreat, so it was just me. He kept sending me messages every minute or so saying things like, "I'm gonna find you, here I come," and other supremely creepy stuff like that. The distance was down to 310 feet, and I was completely losing my mind and didn't know what to do, so I just deleted my whole profile. Nothing else happened that night, though I was absolutely terrified he was going to come knocking at my door. Fast forward to 3 days later, I decided to re-download Grindr, and after doing more research and seeing that I can just adjust the settings so that my exact location isn't visible, when I logged on for the first time with my remade profile, I adjusted some of the search filters until the results were specific enough to display Dad4Young's profile, which I promptly blocked. But later that evening, I got a message from someone with the display name "Will Find You," with the same gross profile picture as Dad4Young, and my stomach sank as a flurry of messages came in. "You messed up. Almost got the police called on me because of you. Couldn't find you, so I had to go to some other dorms and find someone else. Said I was outside his dorm and told me to leave and he'd call the cops. I'm coming for that sweet virgin butthole." Freaked out, I blocked him again, deleted my profile and then deleted Grindr, and refused to re-download it or any dating apps for about a year after that, at which point I worked up the courage to try again, and thankfully haven't heard from this nutjob since. So terrifying old man with a fetish for young and experienced guys, please, let's not meet. I used to work in a hotel as a security guard. The building was built in 1922 and it had a basement. One night the front desk clerk, the valet, and I are just hanging out in the lobby chatting when the phone rings. The phone call was coming from the basement where the offices are. At the time, there isn't supposed to be anyone there. I'd already locked the doors and made sure that no one was there. The front desk picks up the phone and heard a very strange sound and was then disconnected. It gives me chills to the bones. The valet guy and I went down to make sure that no one was trespassing. The doors were still locked and didn't see anyone coming out, so we went inside to the office. The only thing we found is the phone blinking, and it looked like someone had picked it up and dropped it. The valet and I looked at each other and saw the cold sweat on our faces. It still to this day is one of the creepiest things that happened to me while working graveyard security. I lived in a house from the 1920s for a good number of years, and there was this peculiar shadowy figure we referred to as the Shadow Man. This mysterious presence would leisurely amble back and forth in our petite 10-foot hallway and would often linger at the doorways, just observing us silently. In the initial months, I brushed it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination, but things took a turn when we rearranged the living room and positioned the TV on the wall next to the hallway entrance. With the seating directly facing it, surprisingly, visitors began making comments about seeing the Shadow Man too. He possessed just the right amount of darkness to be imperceptible when your gaze was fixed on the television, subtly gliding into the entryway and quietly standing there. Yet, he wasn't so distinct that his presence was blatantly obvious. If you happened to direct your attention towards him and react, he would gradually retreat out of sight. Remarkably, everyone who encountered him described the same non-threatening demeanor, and it seemed as though he took pleasure in observing people going about their lives, and peculiarly, never ventured beyond the confines of that hallway. 20-odd years ago, I was an Air Force cadet. We were at a camp at a disused area of an RAAF base that dated back to World War II. Late at night, we were all moving back to camp to go to bed in formation. I was in front of the group as I had a torch. In the moment it took me to look at the person next to me, as he said something about the hangar we were passing, and then look back at the front, a figure had appeared about 5 to 10 meters in front of us, back to us, and moving in the same direction we were. I thought it was one of our officers, as the silhouette resembled him, but then that officer called out from behind us asking, "Who the hell is that?" We were actually getting closer to them. I could clearly identify the brown bomber jacket, dark blue pants and scruffy short hair, and he was walking with his head down and hands in his pocket. I immediately thought it looked like a "damn, I screwed that up" kind of look. I had him fully in the torch, and he was solid as anything. As we got to the end of the hangar, we were all challenging him to identify himself. Everyone who had a right to be in the area was accounted for, and he had not even acknowledged that we were there. It had been about 2 minutes by this stage, and we were almost within touching distance. He turned at the end of the hangar to go between buildings, and a few seconds later, when we passed the area, there was no one there. Nowhere for him to disappear to, just blank metal walls for a couple of 100 meters and a bare gravel path between 2 aircraft hangars. Around 30 people all saw the same thing. A few days later, a few of us went to the RAAF museum on base, and they had a few old World War II pilot uniforms that were worn by the pilots in training, and we learned that the old hangars we had passed were the old flying school in that era, and what he was wearing were the exact same uniform that we saw in the museum. North Jersey in the mountains. Our family home was part of a mining railroad system. The old railroad was in our backwoods. Our home was an old slaughterhouse/livestock farm. Dug up skulls and bones my whole childhood. We actually had the ruins of the old slaughter mill in a field with blood, drainage systems, to a pit with lots of bones. My entire childhood, stuff would fly off the shelves onto the floor, or you'd set an object down on the counter and it would be gone. I actually witnessed these things. Sometimes I would feel someone sit on my bed too. As a young adult, I constantly burned sage in my room to try and get rid of whatever was stuck there. My parents remodeled the house and found a bunch of animal bones buried in the foundation, and by foundation, I mean a pile of dirt with wood set on top of it. Eventually, I felt the scary thing leave my room, but there was another ghost still present. During COVID, I moved back in with my parents, and a few times a week, I would hear their heavy-ass door open and shut. They had a porch and a deck with multiple doors, so air pressure could literally not cause a door slam. I'd hear heavy boots downstairs and yell, "Hey Dad!" No response. Check my parents' window that overlooked the driveway, and of course no one would be home. My parents are still in this house, and say they constantly find all their kitchen cabinet doors open, or they hear stuff in my old room that sounds like a bookcase falling over, and they rush up and everything will be perfectly fine, or things will go missing and they'll find them in my old room. When they remodeled where the attic/staircase was, it became my mini bathroom. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and the light would be on and the door would open all the time, and I don't sleepwalk or anything like that. My parents definitely agree there's a connection to that being where the attic was. Also, my electronics would turn on randomly in the middle of the night too. TV remote batteries are dead, but TV turns on at full volume at random shows, at a streaming service, or a dead Bluetooth speaker switches on and starts playing really loud static. I still have that speaker in my new home, and it hasn't done that since moving. Another thing that's interesting is the month leading up to me moving out, post-COVID, all the light bulbs in my room would explode. Yes, explode. Minding my own business, working from home, pop, glass everywhere, even in the bathroom when the lights were off. I don't think it was bad wiring or electrical issues because it never happened again after I left. My dad never believed in ghosts, but now that he's retired, he 1000% believes we have them. He was in the military, so he thinks it's funny, and calls the ghost Gladys, but definitely prefers to spend his time outside. My mum doesn't think it's funny at all, and I'm just glad I live very far away and refuse to stay with them whenever I visit. It was a dark and cold Christmas night. Seriously. Northern Minnesota, Christmas Eve with my family. Outside was well below zero. My aunt and uncle's house, very old, very haunted. My uncle and aunt will tell you, yes, it has spirits. They have their own stories. I was around 17, visiting from warmer climates. We were opening presents at night, as is our northern tradition. I was sitting on an odd spot on the carpet in the family room. Everyone else had chairs. I recall we were all laughing at something, a joke or such. You know, family get-togethers. Then it happened. Suddenly there was a loud boom from the dining room, which is really just the dining table on the far side of the room. It sounded like a heavy slab of wood fell over. I felt it through the floor. Quickly I turned to the right and saw a low dark shape speed out from under the table and into the kitchen. It was black, with a kind of dark orange fur stripe. Whoa, I thought. The cat knocked over a box or something, then ran into the kitchen. They had a cat calico named Topsy that was semi-feral and true evil. The fur color of what I saw would be sort of right, and everyone was looking around asking what the hell that had been. That was the cat, I said. I saw a bolt into the kitchen. Must have knocked something over. Can't be Topsy, my aunt said. She's over here. Sure enough, the cat was sleeping on the windowsill near my uncle. I was suddenly confused, as was everyone. Then what did I see? I went over to the dining table, but nothing had fallen over. There was nothing to fall over. Dining room tables and chairs were where they were supposed to be. It was perplexing. Now, I cannot recall if anyone else told me what they saw. I know that everyone heard it. I told them exactly what I saw, but thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Did you see something and then it was gone? Asked my aunt. Yeah, sounds about right. The episode puts a stop to family frivolity for a bit, and we recovered. Later, I helped load presents into my cousin's truck, because on a minus 36-degree night, I just filed it in my brain as a hallucination or mind trick. Years later, I learnt of shadow people and things that go bump in the night. One paranormal writer wrote a similar experience while investigating a haunted restaurant. Right in front of him a loud thud, and a dark shape that ran through the closed door to the restaurant's kitchen. Yet the door never moved. I thought it sounded about right. So, could it have been shadow people? The first story was written by my sister when we visited Queen Mary's back in the 1970s. I asked what she remembered, and this is her version of the events. You were circa second grade, and still very much in the early stages of learning how to read. We were standing shoulder to shoulder, with our hands on the outside railing of the Queen Mary's outside deck, looking out towards the ocean. We'd left Mum and Dad out of sight, and only relatively nearby to run over to see more of the ocean view. We stopped at a nice, open and quiet spot. No one was nearby to where we stood viewing the ocean harbour. In the distance near was an airplane, towing a banner advertisement for an upcoming beach concert. You stood there, and were trying to sound out the words on the banner, going very slowly as a beginner reader. After a short time, you struggled to read the banner out loud. I heard a woman's voice right behind the two of us. Just for half a second, I thought it had been our mother, but then I realized it wasn't hers. But this friendly-sounding woman was gently sounding out the next syllable, whenever you'd stop reading out loud or were having trouble. But the woman sounded quite nice and was gently helping you whenever you came to a hard combination of letters. You followed suit in perfect timing with her instructions. By the end of the banner's message, though, I lost patience and spoke out loud the very last syllable right at the same moment I was turning around to smile and thank the woman for her help, but was confronted with, "Whoops, this can't be." There was absolutely no one behind us, not just right behind us, where the helpful woman should have been. There was no one in that entire section. That was too spooky for me, and I decided we better go back ASAP to where we left Mum and Dad. Funny thing is, I remember the lady, I do mean lady, standing next to me before my sister arrived. Her face was kind of unremarkable. She had an old lady flower dress, purse, gloves, formal, big fan of QM, going on about, "What a beautiful ship, don't you think so?" I was a polite kid, so said something like, "Yeah, it's neat." I was busy looking at the other ships in the harbour when my sister arrived, and the above narrative took place. I don't recall her speaking when my sister remembered her talking. I thought she'd left already. This happened about 3 years ago now. Back in February, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try out an open relationship for a little while for various reasons. We lived separately in one of the largest cities in northern Middle America, and there's a decent-sized population of college students, like me, to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One night I was bored and scrolling through Grindr, looking for an easy hookup, when I got a message from a guy that was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so agreed to go to his place. So, he lives quite literally down the street from me, and I could see his building from my window. I walked over, he let me up into his apartment, and we made small talk, and I mentioned where I lived. Hell, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first, I thought there was something off about the guy. Not necessarily bad, just different. An odd twitch in his hand when he gripped the banister, the vacancy of his eyes when he smiled. But I wasn't exactly surprised that after we got to his apartment, the first thing he did was tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello. And the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there staring and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter and went, "Oh crap, man. Should have asked, you cool with that?" I am not a good Christian boy. I had broken into a church while tripping on LSD. I had done the nasty on a headstone back in high school, but I have my standards. So I shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Yo, I'm sorry. You don't gotta go. We don't gotta mess around. You wanna watch Transformers 3 or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away to the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early February chill and hurried back down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs barefoot in pajama pants and a t-shirt until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was standing there in the doorway watching me. I didn't have any premonitions of weirdness or doom. I grew up in Missouri. Junkies barely register as odd at this point, so I went home and went to bed. Now you may have guessed it, but I'd never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I hadn't seen most of my neighbors because my neighborhood is an odd mix of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing like my paramour's building. All on one street. So it didn't really register when I started seeing him more. I would leave for work in the afternoon, and he'd be on the other avenue across from the building strolling along. Or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A few times I saw him walking across the campus mall, as my apartment building is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice, I'd notice him in the grocery shop, where I work as a barista. but it is the only one within walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of February. Eventually I started noticing. He'd always be walking down the street opposite my building when I left for work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He'd never approached the coffee stand within the store where I work, but he would look at me. A few times I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and leave without buying anything in particular. I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day late February, I worked an early shift. When I got off, I was feeling a little crazy from lack of sleep and reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work. And on the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was the guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant detective analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room. Then I looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension and we stared each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude wasn't giving off any dark or evil vibes. I've met people that do. No, what I saw in his eyes was much more human and scarier. Desperation, loneliness, pain and anger. He hurried after me. I'm 6'3" and a former sprinter, whereas he's a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set and tried opening the second, tried pushing the handicap button to open them and then just gave up. "Look man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass on the door. "Can we talk about it?" I shook my head. "Leave me alone." Then I whirled on my feet and stomped over to the elevator, and when I turned back, he had retreated into the snow. I didn't see him for a few weeks after, which was nice, because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past the dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go and smoke. One night my boyfriend was over at my place. He just got out to smoke before we went to bed and mentioned that he wanted me to come over with him the next time we went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in close while he shivered. "It's dark and cold, and I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled into my chest. "There's this creepy dude that sometimes stands on the corner across the way and just stares at the building. One time he asked me for a cig and told him I didn't have one when I literally had one in my hand. He laughed, kissed my chin and passed out, and I lay there awake, troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was asleep deeply, meaning after about 5 minutes, I extricated myself and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night. I could see across the street. Under the orange glow of the streetlight was the guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me, he waved. I flicked him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should tell my boyfriend because he was either immediately going to call the police, which I hate doing, or try and defend me. And while I love him with my heart, I didn't want to watch a fight between my junkie stalker and my underweight nicotine-addicted boyfriend, so I kept it to myself and hadn't told him. But I did start accompanying him when he went out to smoke. The guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking away down a side street. Sometimes he'd watch from a distance, and sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend thankfully never noticed, and I kept my composure and nothing happened. One night though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke like normal. When we reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us about 50 feet back. I turned my head to check and there he was. He waved at me again, and something told me I had to get back inside. "Hey, babe, let's get back inside, yeah, I'm cold." "Aw, baby, okay, I'm almost done," he replied. We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning I knew the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's and kept up the casual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. We got back to the apartment, and he got changed for bed while I grabbed some water. So I'd never lived in an apartment before, and I didn't know if it was odd or not, but this building has a wired telephone in each unit that rings when someone wants to be let in. Ours never rang unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night, when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just someone playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted the comment without struggle, and we laid down in bed. After he was soundly asleep, I got up, got dressed, grabbed a few things and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, Fanboy was out there in the parking lot and waved at me and jogged over, smiling broadly. "Hey man, what do you want?" "Look man, I just feel like we ended things awkward last time and I wanted to talk to you." "So, you stalk me?" "What?" He started to look angry, his brows furrowing. "Nah man, I didn't stalk you, I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now you're walking around here with that skinny boy trying to rub it in my face. Don't appreciate that." "Look man, you want to talk about this back at my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight. I won't shoot up or nothing this time." He said this while stepping ever closer, smiling more broadly. He took another step. I saw in his right hand a dully gleaming piece of metal, a folded up switchblade. He smiled at me and I stepped back, shaking my head. His smile drained into a deep scowl. "I'm done asking. You're gonna come over to my place now and finish what we started," unfolding the knife and pointing it at me. This dude was 5'8" tops and skinny, and I'm 6'3", 200 pounds and regularly lift weights. Also, I had a 12-inch kitchen knife which I drew from my coat pocket and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife, then back at his and smiled again. Bro, I was just playing. We can just talk here, bro, right? I don't..." "Leave my boyfriend alone, or I will cut your face and eat it." "Dude, what?" "I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school." I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket. I took a step closer, pressing my advantage, holding my knife level. He backed away quickly, almost falling on the ice until he was full sprinting back to his place and I was chasing him down with my knife. Until he crossed the street, I stopped, slid the knife in my pocket and watched him run back to his building. Then I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend that I just had to go pee, and fell asleep. So, nameless horny junkie, let's not meet, or I'll eat your face. My friend wanted to renovate their basement, and the first step was replacing their bulkhead stairs. His daughter was probably 4 years old at the time, and they needed to keep an eye on her, so we set her up with some toys in the basement while we were working. As we were cutting the stair treads to size outside, we heard his daughter laughing and talking and assumed she was just playing with her dolls. Around lunchtime we took a break and went into the basement and asked my friend's daughter what game she was playing. She mentioned that Nana had come to visit and she was showing her her dolls. I should mention that my friend's grandmother, who owned the house, had passed away a few years before his daughter was born and had never met her. There were still a few boxes of her possessions in the basement that the family had decided not to get rid of. Whether it be ghost or child's imagination, I'll let you decide. Nonetheless, gave me the shivers. As a child of maybe 4 or 5, I had to stay at my grandmother's flat a fair amount while my parents were getting divorced. Me and my sister had both seen a shadow figure at the end of her hallway, always just standing there by the bedroom at the end of the hall. I always thought it was my granddad, as he passed away when I was 3, but my sister had seen the same shadow figure at the end of the hall when my grandpa was alive, as she's 8 years older than I am. My grandmother had a frosted glass door to the front of the room that we usually kept closed. You can see down the end of the hall and a slightly blurred view of a Spitfire airplane photo when the door is closed, and you can definitely make out a real person walking down the hallway, albeit blurry. But this shadow man would be standing there from time to time. We could all see him with the door closed, but as soon as the door was opened, he was gone. Always a cold spot down the end of the hallway too. One night in particular, I was staying over, and I had a feeling as if someone was watching me. My nan had put me to bed, and I felt eyes staring at me. I tried to brush it off, and I could feel and hear heavy breathing right behind me, like the hairs on my neck stood on end, and I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I thought it was my nan coming to check on me, but I didn't hear the door open at all. I turned my head around expecting to see my nan, but no one was there. The door was closed, the breathing stopped in my ear, and I was honestly terrified and couldn't sleep at my grandma's after that. To this day, I still see the shadow man occasionally at the end of the hallway, and still feel the cold spot when I go past. I don't think he's meant to harm us at all this time, and the spirit, whether my granddad or something else, has never done anything malicious, but that moment solidified that ghosts and spirits exist, at least for me. Between the ages of 10 and 15, we lived in this extremely old house. My parents bought it when it was a fresh 98 years old, and we were only the fourth family to ever live in it. The old couple before did seem eager to get out of there. My bedroom was the smallest room upstairs at the end of the hall. The attic door was in my bedroom, so no one could have come in or out. My father had told me that I would sleepwalk in that house. I would walk down the hall or into their room and say things like, "Don't you see this book I'm reading?" and "Maisie wants to play." They were creeped out but chalked it up to sleepwalking. However, it was never an issue before or after this house, but it was consistent while we lived there. In my room, I was laying in my bed, and I heard 6 loud bangs in the attic. They were fast-paced and directly above my bed. My first time hearing it, I was so freaked out I ran out of the room, but my parents convinced me it was probably a squirrel. The second time I heard it, I went right into my twin brother's room and slept in his bunk beds. I wouldn't sleep in my room anymore. One night I had a few girlfriends over, and I was telling them about these 6 bangs in the attic, and literally as I was talking about it, it happened. I remember going, "See?" because no one believed me. They were petrified, and one of them even went home straight after. When we were moving out the house, weird stuff started happening. Doors would slam shut. One door slammed shut so hard, all of the pots and pans fell down from across the hooks. Boxes would fall over, pans would fly across the room, and our dog was constantly barking and whimpering. I always wondered why it got more intense when we were moving. I still live in my hometown, and a new family lives in that house. Any time I've driven by it, there's a guy who hangs out on the porch, and I always want to ask them if anything weird happens, but I don't want to freak them out either. I was raised outdoors, hiking, saltwater fly fishing, hunting, and I'm an Eagle Scout. This happened over 20 years ago in the panhandle of Florida. I had been working 12-hour night shifts for almost a year. I wasn't drunk or on anything else. I took my '67 Firebird convertible to an old car wash around 1:30 a.m. No other cars were there, and it was located on a main road, but being a medium-sized city, there wasn't much traffic at the time. I pulled the car into the vacuum machines with the front facing the road and the rear towards the open-ended car wash bay. I took out the floor mats, started the loud machine and began cleaning. Almost 3/4 of the way through it, I was bent over half in, half out of the car, and I got the overwhelming feeling I was being watched. I leaned out of the car and stood up, and I was not expecting what I saw. It's hard to describe. Behind me was one of the car wash bays. 3 of them connected together with cinder block walls between them, typical style setup. Hose on the side, no front or rear so that you can drive through. around 20-foot ceilings, and on top of the ceiling had a large light which illuminates the stalls and projects out about 10 feet on either side of them. I had been using this car wash my whole life until I moved from the area. There was something there, not standing there, just floating. But it wasn't touching the ground. It seemed the shape was around 7 feet tall, and at least 2 feet off the ground. This will sound insane, but it looked like someone's shadow. I could make out a head, shoulders where the arms would be, and the legs. It was proportioned like a tall human would be, but it was a shadow. No gaps where the armpits or center lines for the legs. A standing shadow. The main body type was black, with a TV-like fuzz effect through it, like on older TVs. Around its full outline, I can only describe as static electricity, not shooting out everywhere away, but arcing around it. I didn't believe it for a second. I noticed that everything else looked so normal, so I wasn't having a heart attack or a seizure. I could see the fence and the dumpster back behind it. It was literally almost in the middle of the washing stall, but more to the front. I was around 20 yards away. I got no bad feelings from it, and I didn't feel sick, just like it was there watching me. The loud vacuum was still running, and I couldn't hear anything coming from it, so I don't know if it made any noise. I acknowledged it in my mind and thought, okay, I'll see you. I was getting my things and about to leave. It never approached or moved, it was just there. I went around the car and grabbed my floor mat on the passenger seat. I have no clue why. I should have just left. I rounded the front of my car with it still there, sat down, started the car, looked back, and it was gone. I drove off immediately. I don't expect anyone to understand. I just knew it wasn't there to harm me. I've had a few strange things happen in the woods, nothing crazy. It really just felt like it was a watcher, was just there to observe. I've searched for other encounters with descriptions like it, but have yet to find one that matches mine. This story happened in the early 2000s. Both of my parents are adamant skeptics, and yet none of them can explain away what exactly happened this fateful afternoon. Allow me to elaborate. Me and my family had just gotten out of our car and were staring at the movable truck. We had just moved from the city into a more suburban area, and it was the first time in my life I was going to get my own bedroom. My sister and I, finally, were going to have our own space, which was very welcome indeed. The house had a ground level room, one upstairs, and a very large basement. I went into the house first and ran up the stairs wanting to investigate all the rooms. I was determined to pick the best one for myself. I went up the stairs and liked the look of the room. I went down to the one on the ground floor and thought to myself that my parents would probably end up with this one as it had an ensuite bathroom. But then I went down the stairs into the basement, and when I made it down, the space, although not very well lit, seemed perfect for all my needs. I could see where I was going to put a recliner chair, where I could put the foosball table, a TV, and my GameCube, and a perfect spot for my bed. It was in that moment I decided I was going to have my way and get the basement room. I ran upstairs as fast as I could to inform my parents and my sister that I had taken dibs. When I got up there, I was surprised to see that my parents were all in the kitchen with my sister, and walking up the driveway was my Uncle Alan. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I asked. "Oh, just thought I'd help out," he replied, and came downstairs with me to the basement as we were making conversation. He wasn't actually doing much. In retrospect, I thought he was helping me move boxes, but he was just kind of standing there and nodding to everything I was saying. When it came time to go upstairs to grab a few more of my things, he walked up the stairs with me, and my mum noticed him straight away. as it was her brother. She says, "Hey Alan," and they start having a conversation, and he idles in the kitchen for a while I go and grab one of the boxes. Just as I come back to the kitchen to see how everyone is, they ask if I'd like a cup of tea, to which I accept. Strangely enough, Uncle Alan respectfully declines and says that he isn't very thirsty right now, but that maybe another time. This is odd as he's a prolific tea drinker. In fact, they only really asked knowing he'd want one to begin with. I go downstairs, organize a few of my things, thinking where I'm going to put them, and then make my way back up. I get given a tea, and just sit in the kitchen for a minute, enjoying the view out into the garden, the first one I've ever got to experience for myself. As I'm talking to my family, I ask where Uncle Alan is. My mum says she assumed he went to help with the boxes. She says it's funny because she didn't know that he knew that today was our moving day, but was pretty happy for the help. My dad comes in with another box, and that's when I asked Dad if he saw where Alan had gone. With Alan being a grown man, we assumed he just had other business to attend to, and maybe it was a quick visit, even though he didn't say goodbye, which was strange in itself, but we kind of played it off. Later that afternoon, my mom had gotten pizza, and as we were eating it at the house, suddenly she gets a phone call. She's the only person with a mobile phone in the family, and as she picks up, she hears nothing but crying and hysteric screaming on the other end of the line. She tries to calm down my grandma, who's on the other end of the line, and after a small conversation, my mum starts saying, "No, that's not right. That's impossible." You see, at 8 in the morning, while he had been driving to work in the city we had just moved from, he had been driving through a traffic light while it was green for him, when a lorry went straight through the red light and smashed into him, obliterating his car and killing him pretty much instantly. My grandmother had only just found out, and as you can imagine, was absolutely losing it. My mum was incredulous. She said that must be wrong. Alan had been here for about 20 minutes at about 10 o'clock this morning. It was impossible. My dad, my sister and myself all saw and spoke with him. But as the day went on, it became ever more real that what happened had actually happened. Talk about the worst start to a moving to a new house. My parents were called to go inspect the mangled remains of my uncle and confirm it was him, as my grandmother just couldn't look at her son in that horrific way. My parents came back visibly shaken. None of us spoke about what happened. All the plans for the move were kind of put on pause, and about a month later, after the funeral and once we've managed to organize the house, did we manage to actually have a conversation when we were having dinner one evening. My dad started by asking if we could confirm if we all saw Alan, and every one of us explained what we had spoken about with him and how and where we'd seen him. That was definitely a very disturbing time of our lives, but the story does not end there, as that very night, as I was going down to my basement room, I turned on my game and was playing for about half an hour when I thought I heard a creaking on the stairs. I turned my head and there was no one there. After a while I started to get tired, switched my game off, brushed my teeth, and made my way into bed, listening to the darkness and nature outside my window. It was just as I was getting to sleep that I think I see movement out of the corner of my eye, so I groggily start opening my eyes just to see who is there. Light is feeding through the basement window, lighting up a portion of the room. And just as I look around the room, telling myself I see nothing, and try and go back to sleep, do I hear my uncle say, "Goodbye, Sam." I just about crapped my pants, ran up the stairs and slept on the sofa. I never told my family, because I knew they wouldn't believe me. I stayed over at a friend's house when we were both 8 years old. I was moving to another part of the country, so it was going to be our last day and night together. I don't remember much of what we did, but I guess it was a pretty normal day. Sometime during the night, I woke up to go to the toilet. I got up carefully so as to not make any noise and opened the bedroom door. In the darkness of the house, I could make out some kind of humanoid shadow walking down the hallway. I rubbed my eyes confused, and when I looked again, it was gone. I went to wake my friend and told her what happened, and after a pause, she confessed to me that she had been feeling the atmosphere in her house strange for a few days. That was the end of it, as her mother had to hear my loud footsteps as I went back into the room and asked for us to go to bed. From time to time, I will write to her and ask her about that night, but she says she doesn't remember anything, not even the strange atmosphere she said there was. Once when I was still in school, probably elementary or middle, my mum was driving me home from something and it was dark. When we got to our street, I saw someone standing on the sidewalk in front of my neighbor's house, and that house had been known for decades to everyone that lived in it to be haunted. By whom, or whatever, they never knew. But there was one family that affectionately called one of the ghosts that opened and banged cupboard doors in the kitchen a male nickname, Bob, I think. The figure that was in front of my neighbor's house was dressed oddly, like he had come from the circus as one of the players as a rope walker. Tight blue jumpsuit with black stripes and short dark hair. His back was firmly to us, and his arms were tight against his sides, but his legs were akimbo. His feet were also bare, which I thought was odd. I couldn't keep my eyes off him. He was dressed and stood so oddly, and I thought my mum saw him too. I then noticed that the man was starting to turn his head towards me, and a deep dark dread overtook me, so I snapped my eyes away as fast as I could. My mum didn't seem to notice the guy, because she looked at me curiously. When I looked back, the circus guy was just gone. I tried to reason to myself that he'd just jumped off, ran off, and was too fast for me to notice him, and it had been dark. But there was enough lighting in the neighborhood to get a hazy view of pretty much every house if you stood in the right place. I guess he was just one of the ghosts around the neighborhood. It was built decades prior, and my family hadn't been the original owners. I feel presences in my own house downstairs in the hallway frequently too. I work as a kitchen porter in the top floor of a really old building, built around early to mid-1800s. The kitchen is small compared to other restaurant kitchens, but big enough to store everything and have plenty of room. Our restaurant offers a service called Tipsy Tea, where we serve you stuff you wouldn't normally get in a high tea, but in a bird cage that has 3 shelves to put the plates of food. These cages are stored on the other side of the kitchen, hanging on hooks opposite the area where I mainly work. We had a really busy rush come in, and afterwards it died down, so we were able to take a small breather before the next rush of dishes came up. I was in my area with my back to the cages, sorting out a few final things in the dishwasher when I felt something hit my leg with hard force. I turned around and looked down, and one of the bird cages was lying on the floor. At first, I thought someone threw it at me to clean it, but no one was in the area. The 2 chefs were in the walk-in fridge, which was beside my area, and the other was in the chef's area, which is again near my area. So the only way the cage could have been thrown at me was if something unseen used extreme strength to lift it off the hook and launch it across the room. To say I freaked out was an understatement, but since then, a lot of strange things have happened in that building. At least 3 individuals have died in my house, but we don't know the history prior to 1970, and the house was already 17 years old by then. I know a child perished in a house fire, a man died of an aneurysm, and his wife later died due to prescription drug overdose and flu complications. There was also a dark shadow figure I sometimes see outside the front room window, the very spot where a car once ran into our house, with me and my husband sleeping directly on the other side. The car penetrated the siding, broke the studs, and then only cracked the drywall and bent the baseboard, then just stopped. No doubt my husband and I would have died if it had come through. Does it really make sense that drywall has enough strength to stop a car that pulverized 2x4 studs? We think it was Norman. Norman shows up when someone is in the house that's upset or anxious, and the person will feel like they're getting a hug and smell the strong odor of cigarette smoke. I believe the dark things outside the window draw bad things to the house. Maybe the same thing that took Norman before his time, but now Norman keeps the bad things out. I want to tell you a story about my university, but in order to do that you must understand that this building is very old. It was first built in 1407, and it has been many things during its time, being built and rebuilt. But they say the first use of this building was to house the Spanish Inquisition. A coven of inquisitors lived here that tortured and executed heretics and those accused of insults against the faith. It did this for more than 60 years, with many famous religious figures living within its walls. But after it was dissolved, the building passed from hand to hand, being military barracks, the Provincial Monument Commission, until finally it became a university. Now, the cloisters of the university are used by hundreds of professors and students, and many of them claim to have seen apparitions. There is the rumor of the blurred figure. Some describe it as a faint white smoke, and they usually see it in the old convent, such as the cloisters and the library or the church, even the upper stalls. The white smoke, or figure, will disappear quite quickly, and is usually seen for no more than 3 or 4 seconds. A few have been able to distinguish that it looks a bit like a female figure, dressed in a wide habit. Some even say that it could be a nun. A widespread superstition among the cleaning staff is when entering a room, they would say, "Encarna, please don't scare me," and when leaving the room, would say good night to her. This is in a hope to appease the spirit. The nun's ghost is said to manifest itself in various ways too, from apparitions to moving elevators in the middle of the night, or disorganizing classroom furniture after the cleaners have finished their work in the classroom, which is why many of the university's nighttime staff, ranging from cleaners and security officers, have resigned since the university's opening. Professors rarely mention the subject, but students who graduated in the first graduating classes have no problem sharing their experiences. Most of them agree that Encarna's appearances occur during the exam periods, when the faculty opened its doors so that students could stay even later at night in the night library, as many agree that the spookiness tends to happen in the night. I myself have never seen anything, but there are many who have witnessed and experienced the hauntings of Encarna. But with such a spiritually charged place that's so ancient, I'm not surprised. 3 years ago, I tried Tinder for the first time. While most 25-year-old women have probably dabbled on Tinder or the like, I hadn't been single since I was 17. I met my ex while I was in high school, and 6 years later we got married, had a baby, and I was happy. But those last few years together, he had really began to resent me and the family we had created. I fought to keep our relationship together, but the abuse became more frequent and intense. It got to the point where I took the baby and fled the house in the middle of the night. My mind was scarred, my heart raw, and it was a very difficult time in my life. A few months after I'd left, I had a new home, a new job, and a renewed sense of life. I was starting to open up and could feel myself healing. I was, however, lonely I was adjusting to shared custody and spent my weekends alone. I didn't want to jump into a relationship, but I did want to explore some of the things my 8-year relationship hadn't allowed me. Joining Tinder felt fun. It was new and scary, and after so much trauma, it felt nice to have so much positive attention. My self-worth was low, so the cheap compliments and instant gratification of the app felt incredible. Who am I to deserve their attention? Why would they choose to speak to me of all women? Not my healthiest coping mechanism, but I wanted to feel desirable. That's when I met Derek. He was an unassuming average guy. He was cute enough, but not so attractive that I felt self-conscious. Derek and I shared a few interests: craft beer, hiking, and he had a sense of humor that I liked. We agreed to meet up at a local restaurant. I was so nervous, my first date in 8 years. I donned my cutest dress, got made up and headed out. As I waited in the restaurant, my palms were sweaty, my heart was fluttering, and I began to question myself. He arrived and everything was awkward at first. We ordered our first beers and started to break the ice. As soon as the buzz of the alcohol began to hit, our conversation took off. We had relaxed in each other's company, and the rest of the date went smoothly. We joked about a karaoke across the street, and he laughed about how he didn't like karaoke. I am a huge fan, and while no superstar, I have spent a good amount of time in choir and can carry a tune well enough. One of my favorite rowdy weekend activities is going to that bar and bustling out some songs with the sweetest taste of gin on my tongue. I convinced him to go with me, and we left the restaurant and sang into the night, taking shots, flirting and laughing, and we ended the night in his truck, clumsy, fumbling with each other's buttons and zippers, hearts racing with excitement. This had been what I needed. We texted back and forth more often, and soon we were talking about another date. I had enjoyed our time together, and liked that I didn't feel a deep connection with him. It was fun, and that was it. Because my heart wasn't tangled up in feelings, he felt safe. We decided for our second date that we would go tubing down a river that runs through our town. We had parked his orange truck at the end of the tubing run and took the tubes in my truck up the river. We agreed that he would zip up my truck key into his pockets on his short, and then he would drop me off at mine afterwards. Bright summer heat warmed our skin, and the water felt crisp and fresh on our toes. The afternoon slipped past as we floated down the river. When we reached the bottom, we deflated our tubes and headed back to my truck. Only, when Derek reached into his pocket, his face sank. He looked at me and said, "Your key is gone." I laughed. Surely he was joking. He insisted it wasn't a joke, and gravity pulled at my stomach, and I began to panic. This was the only copy of my truck key, and I had taken it on the river. I felt foolish and worried about how I would get a new key if we couldn't find it. The river was long. We had been tubing for hours. We stopped at several places to swim. He offered to drive me home and I accepted. During the drive, we made plans to meet up the next day and search for my keys at some of the stops we had made. We spent the next afternoon combing our swimming holes for my key. Up and down we swam, with very little hope that we would ever see the keys. We had to try though, and we kept at it. From one spot to another we drove, we swam and moved on. At the very last place we checked, as the light of the afternoon faded into a hazy orange, something caught his eye. Underwater near the shore were my keys. We were elated and could not believe our luck. To celebrate, we went back to his place for some drinks. He drove me down a long, wooded driveway, and at the very end was a shaded trailer. He told me that he was only renting a room from here from an elderly couple, but they were on vacation, so we would be alone. We walked over the creaking porch and entered the trailer. Inside, I could see the kitchen was a mess. Not just a few dishes, but every surface was covered in mess. He ushered me away to show me his bedroom. It was small and not very clean either. Dirty clothes, mattress on the floor, a Rubbermaid bin with some snacks like Doritos and cheap beer. We did the deed, and the yellow light of the trailer accentuated the stain on the walls. Afterwards, the spark of fun I had felt when we first met had withered, and I felt gross. I decided that would be our last date. A week passed, and we hardly texted. Our brief fling was ending, and I didn't expect to see him again. My mind moved on to other things. The weekend was coming. My friends were in town, and I was excited. We made plans to go to the karaoke together on Saturday night, and the day arrived, when I was surprised to see a text from Derek on my phone. "Hey, are you going to karaoke tonight?" I responded that I was, and he texted back that he would be there. I messaged him and said, "I thought you didn't like karaoke." He said that he had been invited by a girl he worked with and thought he'd give me a heads up that he would be with a date, in case I was there. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know, reassured him that I wouldn't be bothered at all, and said that I hoped he had a great date. Around 9:30 that night, my friends and I arrived at the bar. We got our drinks and picked a booth with a good view of the stage, and I had a strange sensation, like someone was watching me. I turned my head, scanned the bar, and our eyes locked. Derek and his date were a few booths away, and he was watching us. He waved zealously with a big smile. His date turned around to look, and I managed an awkward wave. I was absolutely fine with him being on a date, but I didn't want to advertise that we knew each other or make his date uncomfortable. My friends were all aware of the time we had spent together, my thoughts on the experience, and the texts he had sent me earlier. We were all thinking it was a bit odd that he would go out of his way to interact with me in front of his date, but no harm, no foul. He was just being friendly, right? The evening carried on and we had a great time, basking in the atmosphere, drinking in the songs and laughter. A few hours in, we were sitting in our booth, when Derek stumbled over to our table with his date. He introduced her as Kat, and plopped down beside me, pulling her down into the booth next to him. The strong smell of alcohol oozed off them, and I could see they were hammered. It became obvious they had both had too much to drink, their eyes glazed and words slurred. Kat seemed really nice despite her state, and she launched into a drunk story to the whole table. My friends and I were fairly uncomfortable and were unsure what was going on. Under the table, though, I felt Derek's sticky hands slide onto my thigh. His date was right there and I was stunned. Without making a scene, I subtly removed his hand and excused myself to get another drink. As I walked across the room, I could feel his eyes raking my back, and sure enough, when I turned around, he was watching. When I got back, Kat was slurring that her taxi had come. She and Derek exchanged a sloppy kiss and goodnights, and then it was just us and Derek. Derek's mood shifted after that. He was drunkenly unaware of how uncomfortable the table was, and we could tell he was brooding about his date having left without him. Derek turned his attention to me. He slung his heavy arm over my shoulder and leaned in, his sour breath managing to come together to form clumsy sentences. "You're so cute. I love your laugh." I was rigid and just wanted him to leave. When he got up to get another beer, my friends and I spoke about the situation, one of them remarking, "You know you can do better than this, right?" I agreed, and as casual as this had been, I had made a mistake. We came to the conclusion it would be best if we ended the night early, as we didn't see him leaving me alone. As a backup plan if anything went south, we agreed that the girls would go to the bathroom and leave out the back door while our male friend would distract him and slip away. Derek arrived at the table, sloshing his beer onto my front. He slurred, "Where we going next?" I hesitated, but my friend told him that we were all going home. Derek said he would walk us there, and we politely declined. He was leaning up against a wall and barely holding himself up at that point. We asked him how he was going to get home, and if we should call him a cab. Derek drunkenly pouted that he could just come to my place with me. Trying to shut him down as politely as possible, I told him that my child was there with the sitter, so I couldn't have him over. He didn't need to know that wasn't true. He refused a taxi and said he would just sleep in his truck, since his eyelids were drooping, and looking at the rest of his state, it seemed reasonable that he would be able to fall asleep in a truck. As we started to leave, he stumbled after us. We stopped and reminded him that we were going to bed. He argued against that and shouted to come with me. My friends and I locked eyes. It was time to engage with our backup plan. The two girls and I excused ourselves to the washroom while our friend distracted him. Slipping out the back door, the cool rush of air hit us, and we hurried to the path that led to their hotel. Our friend caught up with us and said he'd left Derek behind at the bar. We were all relieved to be out of there and started to walk back to their hotel. One of the girls was sober and offered to drive me home when I got to the hotel, and I accepted. A few minutes down the path, my phone began to ring. I looked at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. It was Derek. I turned the volume down and let it ring, and to my surprise he left a voicemail. I turned on the speaker to play it out loud, and Derek's voice sounded confused as his words melted together in the phone. "Where are you guys? I thought we were gonna hang out. I don't understand." We were all glad we'd left, and agreed that it had been wild. That's when the phone rang again. Another voicemail popped into my screen. In the dim light of the trail, I played the new voicemail aloud once more. His drunken speech was more intense this time, as he launched into how he didn't understand why I had left. I had hurt his feelings, and he was in love with me. The tone of his voice shook me when I heard him say, "I love you." There was something dark and heavy about it that left me feeling unsettled. We were all creeped out, but happy to see the bright side of the hotel ahead. We traveled the carpeted hallway to their room so my friend could grab their keys to take me, and as we entered the room, my phone began to ring again. This time, the voicemail sent shockwaves of fear through my body. Derek's voice had taken on an edge as he repeated that he loved me, but was actually really mad that I'd left him at the bar. He went on about how I could do that to him. He didn't know what he was going to do, and his voice shook with anger as he stumbled over himself, expressing how I had betrayed him. The last thing he said before hanging up echoed in the hotel room. "You know, I'm really starting to hate you." This guy was unhinged, and I was terrified. I was grateful this side of Derek hadn't shown up when we were alone in his secluded trailer. My friends gave me a hug and told me to call them if I needed anything, and to keep them updated. My friend took me home as I unlocked the door and stepped into the comfort of home. I felt exhausted. It had not been the night out I expected, and Derek's erratic behavior had really freaked me out. Fresh out of an abusive relationship, his actions at the bar, then the voicemails, rang some all too familiar bells. That's when I saw the headlights. It was very late for anyone to be driving down my street. I peeked through the curtains and my blood ran cold. Sitting in the cab of his orange truck was Derek. Mind racing, I panicked. This dude could barely hold himself up when we left. He was blackout, obliterated. How did he drive across town to my house? How did he find me? I immediately remembered the other week when he dropped me off after my key was lost. How could I have been so stupid? I barely met him. Derek's face was stony and etched with rage as he sat in the dark cab staring at my house. He wasn't getting out. He was just staring. While I was on my hands and knees peeking out the window, all the lights were off inside. I wasn't sure if he could see me. Then the screen of my phone lit up. He was calling me again. I quickly hid it so he wouldn't see the light. Hands shaking, I played the voicemail as quietly as I could. Derek only said one thing at a time, a phrase that sent terror shooting down my spine. In a drunken sing-song voice, almost taunting me, he quietly said, "Where are you?" I was terrified. Somehow I hadn't really considered I would be in danger, and chalked up all the fear to my past experiences. Surely I was overreacting, and it was my fault for reading too much into this. I shouldn't be scared, and I didn't want to make a scene. That last voicemail sealed the deal. I even figured if I was overreacting, at the very least he was a drunk driver, and I called 911 and the dispatcher said someone would be there in a few minutes. As I peeked out the window, I saw him exit his truck. He was done waiting. His heavy feet stumbled as they hit the pavement, and he looked around. Derek's voice cut through the night as he began yelling my name. The wild anger in his voice was tangible through the walls, and he just yelled into the street. Derek started to stumble towards my house when the flashing red and blue lights cascaded down the street, lighting up his face and highlighting every ounce of rage carved into his features. 2 police cars pulled up, and the officers got out. I was still peeking out from inside my house and couldn't hear much of what was happening. I watched them breathalyze him, which he obviously failed, and the officers inspected his truck. They all spoke for a while, and one of the officers came to my door. I spoke to him about what happened, and he was very empathetic. He said as unsettling as his actions had been, they couldn't do much because he hadn't given out a direct threat. The officer let me know that they would be taking him for the night and he would be charged with drunk driving, but that he would be out tomorrow, and to make sure I kept my doors locked and stayed safe. The tow truck came to remove his orange truck from the road, and I could see him arguing, but the officers weren't having any of it, and they turned around and cuffed him. As the handcuffs locked around his wrist, he yelled out one last time, looking directly at the window I was peeking out. "I know you're in there. Why don't you come out and say goodnight, Susan?" As quickly as my street had filled up, it was empty. The quiet shadows of the late night swallowing the earlier chaos into nothingness. Derek texted me the next afternoon. "I'm sorry about last night. I was in a bad place." I responded that his actions were unacceptable, and how dare he show up at my house where my child lives at, and that I would prefer to never hear from him again. He apologized one last time, and thankfully I haven't heard from him since. Over the next few months I would see him on a bike going to and from his workplace, so I know he lost his license. I was always wary that we would bump into each other, which thankfully never happened, and I can only imagine how much angrier he was after that night, as it cost him his license. I found out that he moved to the mainland a while back, which was quite a relief for me, and I no longer feel on edge around town. So Derek, let's never meet again. As an electrician that specializes in older buildings, I have a lot of work in Texas and New Mexico, and had a fair share of encounters with the paranormal. One building in particular certainly left its mark on me. It was 2019 when I first set foot in this structure, and my co-workers told me tales about their encounters in the basement that immediately caught my attention. Or during one incident, my colleagues were diligently working on electrical metal tubing in the basement, coordinating their efforts while perched on ladders. Amidst their focus, a bundle of pipes on the floor seemed to mysteriously get kicked. Startled, they exchanged glances, confirming that they were alone in the building. The heavy and noisy basement doors made any unnoticed entry or exit highly unlikely, leading them to question the inexplicable occurrence. Initially skeptical, I found myself reconsidering my stance after a series of inexplicable events. The turning point came during a late-night shutdown operation. As we completed the disconnection of main power, I was double-checking tools and turning off lights at around 2:30 a.m. Ascending the stairs from the basement, once a blast door, I heard a whisper, "Hey," directly behind my right ear. The chilling sensation of the whispered word, accompanied by a subtle breeze on the back of the head, prompted an instinctive and rapid exit from the scene. My hasty departure, exclaiming about the whispered encounter, garnered amused looks from my co-workers who had evidently experienced something similar. In another incident that same week, during a building watch, my journeyman and I decided to wait on the first floor, settling into a comfortable spot. I found myself next to the equipment, requiring constant AC due to the scorching temperatures outside. As I savored the breeze, a pen inexplicably dropped near my head. Investigating the origin, I discovered a dust ring, perfectly shaped like the fallen pen, prompting a sense of unease. Convinced myself that staying inside was no longer an option, and we relocated to the safety of our truck, periodically checking the equipment remotely. Later, my journeymen attempted to rationalize the pen incident, suggesting vibrations from the equipment. However, the presence of a distinct dust ring on the pen's territory challenged this explanation. Footstep, doors opening and closing, and unexplained noises on the first floor continued to plague my experiences, leading to numerous instances where I rushed to investigate, only to find nothing there. Subsequent research revealed that the building had a multifaceted history, starting as a Cold War bomb shelter. During its initial testing phase, 3 participants were sealed inside to access on-site functionality, similar to disaster conditions. Tragically, 1 participant passed away during the first test. The deceased individual was interred in a makeshift grave, marked by dirt, peat moss, and grow lights intended for cultivating food. This happened to me when I was in my early to mid-teens. My family went out one day for a hike, and I hadn't felt like going, so I just chilled at home. Things were fine for most of the morning, and from memory I think I just pottered around the house, cleaning up a bit and watching TV. It was around mid-afternoon when I decided to read a book. I settled down on the kitchen/dining floor by the glass sliding door that leads to the balcony to soak up the sun while I read. It was enjoyable, nothing seemed out of place at all. I lost track of time, so when I read I couldn't be sure how long I'd been sitting there, when all of a sudden my skin began prickling like crazy. I'd never felt anything so intense, pins and needles just running all over my skin, and the hairs on my arms were raised. I realized 2 things. Something was wrong, and I wasn't alone. Without thinking, I looked up, and for a few seconds that seemed to last a lifetime, I saw the blackish shadow in broad daylight. I almost stopped breathing. It was standing partway in the doorway that led from the kitchen/dining area out to the lounge room. I clearly remember that it looked male. It was tall, had wildly spiky hair, and was lean-looking. I couldn't see the thing's face at all, but it was definitely watching me. Then it stepped back and disappeared. My heart hammering, I slowly put the book down and got up and walked over to where I seen this shadow man. There was no indication that it had been there, except for the slightly cold spot in the doorway. Shaky, I went back to where I'd been sitting in the sun reading my book, and I stayed there until my entire family came home. I didn't tell any of them what had happened, and it wasn't until quite a few years later that I told my little sister what I had seen in our parents' house. Then she related a story that was similar to mine. A shadow had formed on the wall around the same area that I had just seen it, just past the doorway to the lounge room. She said it had stayed for a few moments before completely disappearing, and she'd also been alone at the time. I never asked my older brother if he'd experienced anything, but the 2 younger siblings and I were sure there was something in that house. All 3 of us at one time or another had experienced the sound of someone walking around in the dead of night, The sound would start out of nowhere. 3 slow, dragging steps that would go from the kitchen to the lounge room and then stop. It could have been the Shadow Man, or maybe it was something else. I never saw the Shadow Man again while I lived there, but I'll never forget it. I lived with my now ex-boyfriend, and I had fallen asleep on the couch in the basement. It's undeveloped, and we have different areas for a movie room, laundry room, and a playroom for his young daughter. I had never fallen asleep down there before, and I was exhausted and it was 3 a.m. So I decided to just sleep instead of go up 2 flights of stairs to bed. I was more restless than usual. I kept waking up for no apparent reason every few minutes or half hour or so, and was able to tell roughly how long the sleeps were because I'd left the TV on or without sound and would fall asleep watching one show and wake up to another. I was confused as to why I kept waking up, but was extremely exhausted to really care, so I kept falling back asleep. Then one time I woke up to the sound of a semi-loud bang that had clearly come from somewhere in the basement. I sat up, looked around and didn't see anything. I thought my boyfriend may come downstairs, but it was still and silent. I go back to sleep and maybe 10 minutes later I hear it again, and immediately I hear his daughter's rocking Elmo toy start talking. I don't remember what it was saying because I was too freaked out and too busy trying to figure out what the hell was going on, but it was about 15 seconds of this fricking toy randomly making noise. I get up, turn on the light, walk around over to it, and it's just sitting there, standing with its permanently wide-eyed expression. I immediately head to bed and cuddle up to my fast-asleep boyfriend. The next morning I asked him if he was playing a trick on me or something, and he was like, no. He was dead asleep the whole time, which I believe because he was fighting off a cold and had worked late that day. I told him about what happened with Elmo, and he said that it only makes noise when you're holding onto it and rocking it back and forth. He insisted I was crazy. We lived alone except for when his daughter was there on weekends, and this wasn't a weekend. I was so freaked out, but I never went down there unless all the lights were on and it was daytime. He told me of his buddies, and then made a lot of fun of me non-stop for a week. Oh, and the Elmo voice? Hilarity to its finest to them. My whole life, I have experienced paranormal activity. It happens, and I move on, until my senior year of high school. I was taught to respect the dead, so I've never gone ghost hunting or tried to mess around with spirits of the sort. Each to their own though. Senior year, I was given an assignment to find ancestors in town and see how far back I could find my relatives. My grandmother told me and my cousin, a junior at the time, about an old cemetery that she believed a cousin was buried in and how to get there. So we go and find her grave and gather the information. We thank her for allowing us to go to her tombstone and to rest in peace. The whole time we were there, my cousin and I felt very off, like we were being watched and not in a good way. We return and everything's fine, until I go to bed and have the same feeling. I'm laying in bed, staring out the door into the hallway, and feel as if someone is there watching me. This continues for months. I thought it was because I was the only one who noticed it, until my brother, 10 at the time, started asking me if he can sleep in my room with me because he's scared of the hallway. He told me he felt as if someone was watching him from the hallway and it felt bad. I agreed that it was not a pleasant energy. This was a dark, eerie feeling, and I told him that it would be fine, and we both laid in my bed and stared at the hallway and felt eyes on us. We both said the Lord's Prayer and went to bed. We're not super religious, but me and my brother felt at that moment we needed to say it. I graduated high school, and things calmed down. The feelings seemed to go away, until that morning. My mum went to work and my brother went to school, and I got up, got into the shower, and just as I was washing my hair, a heavy feeling crashed down on me, and I felt again like I was being watched. I turned my head and looked to the side, and there, on the other side of the distorted glass shower door, was a tall, dark figure. I could see the head and the shoulders, but no other features except red eyes. I screamed and threw the shower door open, and it was quickly gone. I got dressed, got the shampoo out of my hair, and left the house straight for my grandmother's and told her while bawling. She looked as scared as I did. My grandmother believes it was a shadow person. Me and my mother had been fighting a lot, a full-blown screaming match, which we never did before the trip to the cemetery. Grandma called my mum, and they called someone to cleanse our house. I never went back. I moved out. My mum sold the house, and I still get horrible feelings when I drive by it. This is the worst paranormal experience, but I have years of stories. I'm currently 29 and there are a lot of them. Just be careful where you go and what you bring home. I once went on a Tinder date. I met the girl downtown. She looked like her pictures and said that I did too, so it was a good start. I first asked her, since we had been walking for a while, if she would like to grab a drink. As soon as I muttered the word, she said no. I thought to myself, oh, maybe she just doesn't drink. So then I asked her if we should grab a coffee. This time she says, oh, I can't drink caffeine. Being frustrated, I said, well, there's more than coffee at Starbucks. And we stopped there, grabbed some non-caffeinated drinks and began to talk. As the conversation developed, it clicked in my brain. No alcohol, no caffeine. She was pregnant. And without saying anything, 2 minutes later, she confessed that she was 8 weeks pregnant. She said that she just broke ties with the father 4 weeks ago, and I was already looking for the door. I was super polite the whole conversation, but then she started talking about us getting married one day. I literally met this girl an hour ago, and now she's telling me about our marriage? Every bell and whistle went off in my head. So I told her that it had been fun, but that it wasn't going to work out. She was sad, so I walked her out of the Starbucks. I then asked her if she needed a ride to her car, but to my surprise she started yelling and crying, saying I could have had it all. I remember walking away as fast as I could. As I heard her yelling in the background, I deleted and blocked her number and swore off Tinder forever. My daughter wanted to have a sleepover for her 10th birthday party. They all set up downstairs, and towards the end of the night, they were watching a movie. Around midnight, I was getting tired, so I got up and checked on them to see if they were all sleeping. I went upstairs to my room where my wife was already sleeping, and my door was open to the hallway. I started to get undressed, and I watched a girl with long dark hair walk from my daughter's room down the hall right past my door. I was kind of surprised, considering I just saw all of them sleeping a minute before, so I stepped into the hallway and no one was there. I checked the bathroom, no one was there. I continued through the house, finding no one upstairs. I thought I saw someone by the stairs, so I asked, "Did you need something?" There was no reply. I walked downstairs to see that all the kids were still sleeping. Dumbfounded, I got a super weird feeling, not scared, but disbelief that this had just happened. Did I follow a ghost into my basement? I never saw anything else in that house, but I started looking for a new house regardless after seeing that. This happened a number of years ago, when I spent a day with my friends Jamie, Brittany, and Muriel. After hanging out, we decided to cap it off by watching a movie in the theatre. As the film came to an end, Jamie received a call from her mum, who sounded deeply spooked. She explained that something was in their house, and that both she and Jamie's sister Ariel were unsettled. Urgently, she asked for us to come over. We left the theatre and hurried to Jamie's house. Upon arrival, a strange vibe hung in the air. Not just me, but Jamie, Brittany, and Muriel all sensed something was off. Jamie's mother recounted their unnerving experience. She and Ariel were in the master bedroom when their dog, Sammy, began barking at an unseen threat. Despite their efforts to calm him, Sammy fixated on a spot on the wall. where a bizarre sequence unfolded. A shadow materialized and glided up the wall, entering the bathroom. Simultaneously, a secured curtain shot up with a bang, accompanied by a whirring sound. Concerned, they fled upstairs, prompting Jamie's mum to call for support. Perplexed and anxious, we formed a circle and began praying. Jamie's mum instructed us not to open our eyes until we were done, but my curiosity got the better of me. I peeked and regretted it immediately, as in the living room corner, I saw what I believed to be a shadow figure. Terrified, I shut my eyes and intensified my prayers. Miraculously, the oppressive air lifted, leaving us all feeling lighter. Assuming the worst was over, we gathered on the front porch to ease tension. After a few minutes, Sammy, who had been calm, suddenly went berserk, sprinting down the driveway. I saw the same dark figure seemingly gliding or floating down it, pursued by Sammy. Abruptly, it shot up and vanished. Sammy returned nonchalantly as if nothing had transpired. But the memory of that enigmatic figure still lingers, haunting the recesses of my memory, and I'm certain of its nature or fate, but the encounter remains etched in my mind. Throughout my whole childhood, my family and I would move from apartment to apartment. Let's call it apartment 2. Everything was going great at our new place. The apartment was old, but had everything we needed. A pool, laundromat, and it was by our school. At this time, I was living with my mum, my sister, and my little nephews in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. My mum gifted me a camera, and all of us started just taking pictures for fun. I wanted to be a YouTuber at the time. We looked back at the pictures, and we were talking, and noticed an extra person. It was small, wearing white, and creeping behind a corner. We all argued. It was the youngest of our family, but he kept saying he was standing elsewhere. My nephew insisted it wasn't him. We all did not want to believe what had happened, so we shrugged it off. A different day, my mum and I were in our room. We were poor and shared a room, and saw a fast shadow running in the hall from the living room to the 2nd bedroom. It was short in height, and it's so hard to explain why, but we got a sense that it wanted us to follow it, almost like hide and seek. My mum and I followed what we thought was my little nephew playing around. We ran into the room, and we looked absolutely everywhere, and we could not find my nephew. My mum and I looked at each other. We knew what we had just seen, but we never spoke about it after that day. I myself couldn't believe it, so I went looking around, in my room, behind the door. I had found marks of 2 children's height written in pencil. The names were foreign, and none that I had heard before. One of the markings on the wall was very similar to that of the shadow. My second to oldest nephew, Jim, would have recurring nightmares at weird times of the night. Jim would randomly wake up at 2 or 3 a.m., sobbing and pointing to the corner. Jim was speechless, and would only pause from crying to say, "There are shadow people looking at me." None of us but Jim were able to see anything there. This continued to happen a handful of times around the same time. 11 years later, my sister picked me up from the airport after I'd gone to Mexico. On the way back home, I was telling her about folklore stories I had been told by a priest in Mexico. Without me saying anything, she says, "You know, I never told you, but I saw a ghost at our last apartment. It was short and see-through, and it had been watching me shower." She went on to mention that it had watched her shower twice, and every time she would look at it, it would get startled and run into the closet door and vanish into thin air. She agreed with me that this entity had a harmless, playful, childlike feeling to it, and continued to tell me that after I had moved out to college, more things kept happening. My youngest nephew was in his living room, lying on the top bunk while playing his Switch. He felt a strong kick from the bottom bed and yelled angrily, "Jim, stop it!" It happened once more, then he got irritated and looked below his bed to find no one there. He started screaming and crying until his mum came into the room to comfort him. My family moved out a few years later, but not primarily because of the ghosts. To this day, I wonder if a child had passed in that apartment, and if what we saw was indeed the same ghost. All we know is that by the way it acted, this ghost child wanted to be included in our family. From when I was 4, I would wake up and see a man standing in my bedroom doorway. In the home lived my mum, me, and my 5 siblings. My oldest brother was around 9 at the time. This is just to state that no grown man lived with us. The man I would see on an almost nightly basis would be shrouded in shadow. I could only make out an outline. His form nearly encased the whole doorway. I was always able to see spirits though, so whether ghosts were real or not was never a question in my mind. I felt it was weirder when people said they didn't believe in ghosts. It just sounded as crazy as someone saying they believed in Santa Claus to me. To preface, while I am a believer, I think skepticism has its place. Many experiences have explainable answers, but some do not. Around 2019, I stayed in the Menja Hotel in San Antonio with my mum. We stayed before a few times, not in search of paranormal experience, but because we liked the hotel and the colonial room. One evening we took the elevator up from the ground floor. On the second floor, the doors opened and a man got on with us. The second he appeared, I knew something was amiss. It felt like the atmosphere in the elevator changed. As he stepped on, he greeted us with a formal hello, and then stood facing the other side of the elevator, while my mum and I faced the doors. The man was close enough to me that I could see the stitching on his late 1800s style clothing, sleeve garters, heavy cotton long-sleeved shirts and vest. His outfit was clearly not mass-produced costume, and the material looked like Victorian/Gilded Age pieces I'd seen in museums. The elevator opened on the next floor, and the man again spoke to us, saying goodbye in the same distinct way he'd said hello. As soon as the doors closed, my mum and I immediately looked at each other, both exclaiming something along the lines of, "What the hell was that?" We each had sensed something almost indescribable just happen, and were very shaken up by the experience. To this day, neither of us can come up with an explanation as to why it felt like the particles around us changed the moment the man got on the elevator, or why his eyes never actually looked at us, as he stared off across the elevator in front of us, like he wasn't really there. He was missing that intangible quality that makes someone human, yet there he was in the flesh. It's so difficult to explain how unsettling our experience felt, unless you've experienced it too. I would love to hear if anyone has ever felt anything similar, whether it be at that hotel or not. This was back in 2006, at an abandoned building in the industrial area of San Diego, abandoned since the 1950s, with no physical address to research the property on. We were a group of young punk rock street kids and turned the building into our home, with couches and tables and other junk we would find. From the beginning, we would dismiss each other's stories of seeing silhouettes or shadow people in the corners, or hearing footsteps around the place. One friend woke up one night and saw another friend attacked by a shadowy figure. He thought it was a person and tackled the figure, only to crash into the wall past the couch. On a regular night of drinking, I, for whatever reason, decided to pass. The next morning, when everyone was leaving the next day to make money, find food, etc., I had decided to stay back and just relax and enjoy finding my space without the building being full. There were a few times while I was sitting in the main room that I thought I heard something, so I wandered out saying, "Hello?" getting no response. On the last occasion, I went out, and when near one of the corners of the building, from within a room made of concrete, in a building otherwise made of wood and drywall. This weirdness is why we called the building the meat locker, that only locked from the outside and was currently locked with our valuables. Inside I hear 3 loud thumps that are clearly coming from the inside of the room, followed by a blood-curdling scream. I ran all the way back to the main room, which was off our entry door. This gave us light until the need for candles arose. It was too late to go out and be productive, so I sat near the doorway and waited for my friends to return. Another time on a summer's night, I was in the room in the building. My friend was sleeping on the floor, and I felt that weird feeling like someone is watching you. So I curled up in my sleeping bag and got all sweaty. Then an old rotary-style phone began to give off a long, eerie ring. The building has no electricity, and there's no phone here for sure. I ignored it, and eventually drifting off to sleep, trying to forget about the scary incidences. My stepdad bought a house that was really messed up inside. There was a lot of garbage and everything like cabinets and bathrooms were broken and unusable. He got a great deal from the bank and wanted to fix it up, and after months of working on it, we moved in. One neighbor kept coming over and asking what we were doing to the house. He seemed unsure if we were staying, and it got weird because he asked my cousin a lot of if we were cool. I was a teenager, and my cousin was in his 20s. Every day the neighbor would chat with us and end with, "So you guys are cool, right?" After a few months, he asked my cousin for a favor. He used to hang out with the old residents, and he thought something might have been left behind. My cousin said the house was completely empty, but the guy insisted. Eventually, my cousin let him in to check. I thought we might get robbed, so I followed them downstairs into the half-basement. The guy opened the furnace room and looked around. Then he asked again, "You guys are cool, right?" It was strange, but he squeezed around the furnace into a back wall. He slid part of it open and revealed a hidden area. My cousin and I were shocked. In the room were bags of cocaine, marijuana, and smaller things I couldn't see clearly. The guy looked scared that we had found it. He gave my cousin money to keep it quiet and then took everything away. We never said a word, but were interested in finding out about the secret space. When I started dating my wife, I was 15, and her stepdad gave me this rock that had a dragon carved into it. It was cool actually and was heavy. I took it home and placed it in my room, inside my entertainment center. As time went by, it became difficult to get a good night's sleep. I would wake up constantly and have trouble getting back to sleep. During this time, I had increasingly suicidal thoughts. I started withdrawing myself from my family, and I was sitting outside on the phone, and I was peering through the window to keep an eye on my nephew who was sleeping on the couch, when all of a sudden a small dark shadow about 4 feet tall went from one room to my room. I immediately got chills and was too afraid to go back inside. Another time I was asleep in my room, and I woke up to this same shadow standing over me. I couldn't move and say anything, and the moment I began praying, it descended into the bed, and I was able to move once more. I got up and ran out of the room, and fell asleep on the couch. One day, I was watching a program about hauntings, and they had mentioned how a demon could attach itself to a doll. That's when it clicked on me, that everything had started once I got that dragon rock from my girlfriend's stepdad. I opened the entertainment center and it was gone. I looked everywhere for it but could never find it. But since it disappeared, everything stopped, and I was myself again. And there were no more shadow people at night or night terrors. There is one small note, and I'm not sure if it's related, but during this time I developed type 2 diabetes, and I always wondered if it had anything to do with it. This story happened around a year ago, a few weeks after I broke up with my boyfriend of 2 years. I was on the receiving end of the breakup, and was a complete mess. I was in college and living at home for the summer, in a very small town during the course of these events. A friend was consoling me, and created my very first online dating profile for me, because gay men can sometimes think that more sex is the solution to everything. His intentions were good, and I have to admit that some of the men contacting me were very attractive. I didn't really know how to use the website very well, so I started to text a few of the guys I had met. This is when Robert comes into play. On the surface, well, below the neck, Rob was a 6'3" gorgeous man who had competed in bodybuilding competitions. Unfortunately, his face looked something akin to an axe murderer. His teeth were messed up, he wore glasses with those really thin metallic frames, and his hair looked like it had been cut by his mother. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. He seemed like a really nice guy. That first night that we texted, we probably stayed up until 2 AM talking about our lives. I heard a few things which aren't really red flags, but are usually turn-offs in what I look for a date. For a guy in his late 20s, Rob didn't have much of a career. He was a high school track assistant coach, and I wasn't really sure if he got paid for this job. The next morning, he wished me good morning and said that we should go on a date that day. I told him in detail how I was just broken up with and didn't really want to meet a guy for dinner and cry from the appetizer to the dessert. He understood and agreed, and then asked me out 3 hours later. This creeped me out, so I stopped talking to him. Rob began to call me several times a day. What made this stranger was the fact that it was every day at a few specific times, 10:17 AM and 9:17 PM, every day. Sometimes he would call 3 times in a row, but always starting at 9:17 AM. Obviously, I never picked up the phone. Considering I texted Rob for less than a 12-hour period, this began to frighten me. I mentioned this story as a joke to another one of my friends who was a police officer, but he took it more seriously than I expected. He told me that I should delete the profile, which I hadn't thought to do, and to be very careful. I deleted the profile right in front of him, and 30 seconds later, I got a text in all caps saying, "Why did you delete your profile?" I was startled. I can't say for sure, but it looked like he was continually monitoring my now abandoned profile on the website throughout the day. Getting more uneasy, my morning phone calls began to seriously worry me. Luckily, a week or so, and roughly 40 missed phone calls later, he seemed to finally get the message. I really wish that previous statement was correct. One morning my mum walked in with the day's mail. She handed me a large manila envelope with a handwritten address that appeared to be scribbled by a child. I thought it was a piece of artwork from one of the several children I babysat, so I opened it happily, and never have I been more wrong in my life. Out of the envelope came a 2-page long typed letter, a complete chat log of our conversation on the website, and a complete text log of our SMS conversation, and a full 8.5 by 11-inch copy of my profile photo taken from the website. I should also mention that I have absolutely no idea how he obtained my address. I also don't even know how you can make a text log without typing up the entire conversation itself. He must have copied my photo from the website long before that. I immediately began sobbing at the 20 pages of horror that fell out of the envelope. I will also admit that to this day, I have never read the typed letter. All I know is that it ended in a huge, creepy smiley face. My mum saw that I was crying, and I told her that I was being stalked. She asked me, "Who's doing this?" and I gave her Rob's full name. What happened next sent me completely over the edge. My mum began crying too, and told me that Rob had been emailing her, pretending to want to donate to her charity. My mum began to freak out as well, and when he began to ask about her children, and she stopped the email conversation. Now both of us crying, I called the local police department and told them that I was being stalked, and somehow a man had found my address and was also contacting my family members. A policeman was sent to our house, and he went through all of our documents and told us that although he had become angry, he wasn't threatening violence, and there was nothing the police could do. After staying until we had both calmed down and talking a few scenarios out, when we were walking the police officer to his patrol car, an unfamiliar car was parked across the street. It was Rob. I didn't get that spooked in that moment. The officer didn't realize who it was, but once Rob saw me standing with a cop, he probably got nervous, and thankfully, I never heard from him again. I'm the youngest in my family, and my siblings always teased me or made fun of me or bugged me, so I wouldn't really want them around when I played. My brother, for instance, always used to dress up as Scream every year for Halloween. It was his favorite. He's 9 years older than me, and he used to wear it around the house to scare me sometimes, because that's just what Break Brothers did to their 5-year-old siblings, I suppose. One day my siblings were out with their friends, my dad at work, and it was just me and my mum at home. I was helping Mum with cleaning and chores, when she asked me to put my brother's folded laundry on his bed for her, as she was starting to do the dishes. His room was in the basement. Now, I did not like the basement of our childhood home. It gave me the willies, and not in a good way. I was always petrified to be down there alone. I expressed to my mum that I didn't want to and that I was scared, and she pulled up the classic mum trick saying, "I'll time you and see how fast you can do it." I loved a good challenge, so I accepted and ran down 2 flights of stairs, opened the door to the basement, ran into my brother's room, threw his laundry on the bed, and, as I had such an uneasy feeling, slammed the door and was running back to go up the stairs. As I was going to shut the basement door, someone wearing the Scream mask was standing there. I let out a blood-curdling scream that was so loud it scared my mum, and she actually dropped the dish she was holding and came down running. I was running up the stairs crying hysterically and told my mum what happened. She yelled out to my big brother to stop playing games with me, and I knew he wasn't home. But my mum tried her best to comfort me. We smudged the house after that, and my mum told the spirit that it had to leave. There was only enough room in the house for our family, and it had to go. Nothing really happened after that. We did end up moving a year or so later into the mountains for my dad's work. Whenever I talk about it, shivers go up my spine, and that was 23 years ago now. A friend and I spent the night at my house, both feeling a bit restless, when she suggested we try the Charlie Charlie game. I agreed. We left our seats and went to my room, and prepared everything. With anticipation, we began the game, posing questions like, "Are you here to cause harm? Are you male and female?" for over 15 minutes, and watched the pencil move to answer our questions. When the game concluded, we decided to return to the living room and indulge ourselves in a scary movie. As we were engrossed in the movie, a loud crash from elsewhere in the house startled us. My friend and I paused the movie to investigate the source of the noise, and we found my favorite plant on the floor next to a shattered pot. We retrieved it and resumed our movie, but then we heard footsteps in the hallway and got up to explore. And when I turned to the corner, I noticed the bathroom light was on. As I reached to switch it off, the lights began to flicker and the sink turned on by itself. Alarmed, I called my friend, who rushed to my side in astonishment and asked what was happening. I told her I had no idea. A few hours later, I ventured back to my room in search for some notebook paper and colored pencils. When I opened my door, the room was enveloped in darkness, and within that obscurity, I glimpsed a tall shadow figure. I quickly flicked the light on, and the figure vanished, and as I turned to exit the room, I heard heavy breathing and my name being whispered. An icy breeze sent shivers down my spine, and in sheer terror, I hastily packed my bag. My friend and I left the house for the night. When I returned the following day, the house remained eerily still and silent, and the enigmatic figure never returned. Just as well. When I was around 11 years old, I was playing basketball in an old gym with one of my friends. The gym used to be part of a high school many years ago, until it was repurposed into a community center. So there was a lower level with old classrooms and storage spaces, and I remembered I used to be afraid of the basement. So I was shooting hoops with my friend when all of a sudden we heard what sounded like kids laughing and playing behind the bleachers, and the sound seemed to be traveling from our end by the gym down to the far side, where the staircase access to the lower level was. Being curious kids, we followed the noises to the far side of the gym, where the noises stopped right in front of the stairway access. Everything was extremely silent all of a sudden. It was as if all the sound got sucked into a vacuum. I remember both of us peering through the window down into the stairwell and seeing what can only be described as a dark human figure flailing backwards down the stairs and into the darkness, as if something had pushed or pulled it away. Immediately I remembered the two of us looking at each other, confirming we had both seen the same thing, and we took off and got the hell out of there. We told the park and rec director what we had seen, and he brushed it off and didn't pay it any mind, but I'm 100,000% sure I saw something unexplainable that day. I was 19 and pretty naive, because I'd never done anything before with a guy or trusted people. His profile was blank on Grindr and said he was age 26 and average shape. He said he was handsome, and his phone glitched when he sent photos, so I believed him. We went to get pizza, and I stepped out of my car when this old man was waiting for me. He was definitely not 26, and he was around 300 pounds. Creeped out, but I thought I might as well enjoy the pizza, right, if he was paying. We got talking a bit, and he keeps telling me vulgar things, like how he can't have intercourse less than 3 times a day, and how dedicated I have to be to him, or else he wouldn't even consider dating me. Eventually he told me his real age was 45, and that he's a dental student. I asked him to take off his baseball cap, because I was curious if he had hair or not. What I saw was a huge horn. He said it's a very large cyst on the top of his head, and he shaves his head to avoid irritation or something. Imagine cartoon characters getting bonked on the head and having the large swollen lump afterwards. That is what I saw. After pizza, I acted like I had a decent time and would message him later. I would actually block him the second I got into my car, since I parked further away. He offered to take me via his car to mine. I said sure because I felt like he was harmless, although quite creepy. In his car, he asked if he could inspect my teeth since he's a dental student. I said no, but he strongly insisted and I said whatever. That's when he took out his belt of dentistry tools and unrolled it. He put on a headlamp and started picking at my teeth. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't like it. This guy was weird and didn't know proper etiquette. I told him my phone dropped on the side seat, so when I went to get it I left the car and drove off in my own. In 1994, when I was 11, I had an encounter with something that I can only describe as a shadow person. At the time I had no idea what it was, ghost, alien or otherwise. It started one April night while I was asleep and dreaming. In my dream, I was sitting on a wall looking over the PE field of my school, when a kid that bullied me in real life came up to me, punching me in the chest, knocking me off the wall. I felt the full physical force of the blow and it woke me, and I woke up screaming at him, my chest hurting from the pain. It's as if my physical body had been hit, and I had the wind knocked out of me. When I woke up, I had bolted upright to a sitting position, clutching my chest, trying to breathe. As soon as I looked up across the room, I saw this thing. It looked like a shadowy hooded monk. Where its face should have been was just a darker shade of black. It seemed to be folding something in its hands over and over again. I say folding, but it was like he was manipulating a liquid cloth. The fabric flowed back and forth in its hands, and also was black. A bright light shone from behind the creature, and I remember being able to see my posters on the walls behind where it stood. There was no other light in the room, other than what was emanating from it. As soon as I saw it, I was paralyzed. I was trapped in my body. I couldn't move, and now my chest hurt even more, since I couldn't breathe. I don't know how much time passed with me in this state. After a while, I could feel my body begin to come back to me. At first, my toes began twitching, then my fingers and eyelids, and then a rush of sensation came back to me. I was finally able to breathe and move around, and the creature was still there. I had no idea what to do. If I was to run out the room, I would have to push past the thing, as he was very near the entrance, and I did not want it touching me again. I tried talking to it, asking who it was. What did it want? Why did it hit me? I asked him to leave, and everything done was met with no response. He kept looking down to what he was folding in his hands, and would look back up at me every so often like he was making sure I was staying put. Something told me that somehow this thing had known what I was dreaming, and he had used the dream to attack me and wake me up, or something like that. The longer he stayed there, the more afraid I grew. I tried pinching myself, closing and opening my eyes, but it was still there. I lived in Los Angeles, and this was a few months after the Northridge earthquake. And after having lived through that, I had this fear of being trapped in my room from a quake. So for a long time I would store supplies near my bed, bottles of water, saltine crackers and a flashlight. I kept the flashlight under my pillow. It's hard to describe, but it was like I heard this voice in my head trying to help me through this encounter. It reminded me about the flashlight, but told me not to let the creature see me get it. I had no idea what I was going to do with the flashlight against this thing, but it was all I had. So I pretended that I thought I was dreaming, and that I was going back to bed. As I laid down, I could see the posture of the shadow creature change. It seemed to become antsy, paying more attention to me, but it would not stop folding the liquid cloth. I grabbed the flashlight, cracked open my eyes to make sure it was still there, and sat up and turned it on and shone it at it. The voice told me to shine it where its heart would be, if it had one, and as soon as the light hit the creature, it imploded into nothingness. I could see a spiral of darkness of light for a few seconds and it was gone. The next morning I had a bruise on my chest where I had been hit. I never saw this strange creature again. I've had a couple of experiences in my life that I wonder if it was tied to it, but I can't be sure. Fast forward now 25 years later. I'm married with 2 beautiful children. My first child, my son, seems to have a bit of a twinkle when it comes to these energies. He's predicted a few things before they happen, but has shared a few dreams with me. He's been showing signs of this stuff since he was first learning to speak, but his little sister does not seem to be able to grasp it, until now. A few months ago, my 5-year-old daughter began to tell me about dreams she was having and she saw a shadow man. In her first dream, she had woken up to use the bathroom, and when she finished using the toilet, she opened the door of the bathroom to leave and saw him on the other side of the door. The shadow man chased her, trying to grab her, and ended up biting her on the finger. She had a number of dreams about the shadow man chasing her for the past few months. She says that she has somehow turned her good dreams into bad dreams and is now afraid of him. I have never told her or my son about my encounter with the shadow person. With this story, she has told me about her shadow man. She has made it very clear that she's only ever seen him when she's asleep and dreaming, until today. She was at her preschool having a snack, and she was standing by a table where her snacks and milk were, and she looked up out of the entrance to her classroom, where she saw the shadow man from her dreams outside the doorway to the classroom. It scared her so badly, she knocked over her milk box and tried to point it out to her classmates, but no one else saw him. She says the shadow man ran away when he saw she could see him. I don't know what to do. My husband, even though he's a believer in paranormal possibilities, thinks it's just an overactive imagination. He's not saying she's lying, but thinks she didn't really see what she thinks she saw. The way she speaks to me about the Shadow Man and the detail in which she shares her dreams give me chills. It reminds me so much of what I encountered as a kid. I don't want my daughter to be scared of this thing, and I don't want her dreaming about it either. But I don't think telling her something like, "It's not real," is going to help. I also don't think that telling her it's real is going to help either. I remember my parents not believing me after my experience, and that hurt. They would tell me to not just be silly or dramatic, even though they knew what happened to me was real, and I was terrified of it. Whatever it is, I don't think she's lying, and it's definitely real to her. And if it's paranormal, what the hell is it? Could it be the same thing that attacked me? Is it coming after my kid? Why? I lived in a haunted apartment for 6 months. We noticed activity right away, within the first week, and it slowly escalated during the time we were there. It started with the lights. We would leave for the day and shut off all the lights, only to have every single light be on when we got home. Then the TV started turning itself on in the middle of the night, and closet doors would open on their own. Then I started to feel extremely uneasy every time I would shower or get dressed, like someone was watching me. I developed severe depression about 4 months in, and my normally laid-back boyfriend at the time developed horrible anger issues. We broke up and moved out, and I immediately went back to my normal, happy, non-depressed self. At the time I was living there, I had no idea it was the energy of the house that was affecting us so much, and I'm glad I got out when I did. Things could have gotten really dangerous for me if I had stayed. I wonder if whatever entity resided there was sucking out our happiness and bringing out the worst in us. In any case, I'm glad to be away from there. When I was roughly 18 years old, I spent a lot of time at my best friend's house just outside of the suburbs of Toronto, Ontario. One night, a group of us were heading out to the bar. There were 5 of us in total, and we were all in the house together before heading out. My best friend and I had been there most of the day. No one else was in the house but us. At around 10 p.m., we all headed out to the car and piled into a Pontiac Sunfire. I was in the passenger seat, my girlfriend was driving, and 3 people were in the back seat. The front of the house was mostly windows, including some blurred glass on the door, and very few places without glass of some kind. As we're backing out, I looked up and watched a dark, featureless man in what looked like a cowboy hat walk from the left of the house, coming from where the stairs to the basement were to the front door, only to disappear before the windows to the den. There were maybe 4 feet of wall before the next window, and he was just gone. At first I was stunned, but I managed to say, "Did anyone else see that?" Without missing a beat, the girl sitting in the middle seat behind me said, "The man in the cowboy hat." I was amazed. When someone uses the expression, "looks like you've seen a ghost," that was the look on her face, like a mixture of fear and excitement, just enough to make you nauseous. My best friend seemed less surprised. It was a family house and property going back for generations. There was a chandelier above the basement stairs that his father told us dated back a few hundred years and was converted to electricity a long time ago. The area the man came from were the basement stairs, only we realized after we saw him that there was no way he couldn't have been walking where he was walking. There were stairs, and his height didn't change. After a few minutes of trepidation, we all went back into the house together. We searched everywhere for the man, and I mean everywhere. If there was a man living in the walls, we needed to find out. All the doors were closed and locked. All the windows were closed and locked, and there was no one else there. To this day, I have zero doubt that we saw some sort of paranormal entity. My best friend mentioned it to his grandfather, and we asked his dad, but we still don't know for sure what it was. The fact the 2 of us saw the exact same thing, at the exact same time, made it extraordinary, and made me feel less crazy. This is something that happened to me about 25 years ago. It was a bank holiday weekend in the UK, so my now ex and I decided to stay in Knaresborough for a night. It was raining heavily, and everywhere we tried had no vacancies until we came to an old coaching inn. I remember we drove under an archway and got shown an upstairs room by the male owner. The room was huge. The door was on the left and a bed against the same wall as the door. Wardrobes along the right wall, and about 15 feet away, a sash window with velvet curtains. We unpacked and went downstairs for a drink. We were the only people in the bar. The owner proceeds to tell us about a young girl who had lived there centuries before, who had found herself pregnant and taken her life via rope. That really lightened the mood. I remember them being scared to visit the loo alone and make my ex stand outside. We then went out into the rain to get a few drinks and food, but ended up coming back early because there really wasn't anything exciting happening there. I remember going up to bed and for some reason really detesting my ex. I didn't want him touching me, and we woke up the next morning and came home. After that, I seemed to always be ill for about a year, catching every germ going. And my ex told me that when we were in bed that night, a white mist had come out the window and spread over me. He hadn't said a word because he didn't think I'd believe him. The room was in total darkness because the window was so far away and the curtains were thick. I asked if he thought this mist was trying to get to me. He got the impression it was protecting me. I don't know what to think. We've never had an explanation for it. I wonder if it did attach itself onto me, because I became so ill and drained for a while. I lived for a year in an old Victorian house in Donald, Oregon, and it was haunted. I was maybe 11. There was a ghost. She was a teen or young adult. She mostly stayed in my closet, or under the eaves, or back in the servants' passage the house had to go between the closets in the bedrooms. She was harmless, and had no seeming interest in causing trouble. Occasionally she would throw items, things that wouldn't hurt like wadded up paper or clothes, at me to wake me up while I slept. I think she was just bored and knew I was aware she existed. My entire family has seen her or had some interactions with her before we moved. Shortly before we left though, she just stopped being there, not sure where she went, or even where an apparition can go. But as it was mostly a pleasant experience, it got me interested in the stuff too. It also had the pleasant effect of making me not at all concerned with dying. Obviously there was something after. I rarely ever actually see them, but for some reason know they are around. Somehow they know I know and try and get my attention, sometimes in good, other times in bad ways. The doctor's office apartment. Then there's the story about moving my fiancée out of her apartment. After that, for about 6 months, things would randomly tip over or fall over and nearly kill me about every 2 weeks. Stuff that had been leaning in a corner for 2 years and never moved all of a sudden would collapse and brush the back of my head as it fell. No one believed me, except for the guy Chris who helped me move her and who saw stuff try to kill me twice. I'm glad whatever it was gave up or moved on. It was a lot of things over time. The power would go out in part of the house occasionally, no breakers tripped, no wiring issue I could find, as I am an electrician, and always in the kitchen and pantry. My dog, who would normally lose it if I didn't take him to work with me, started refusing to go if there was anyone staying in the apartment. Both our dogs, who were very food-driven and usually loved being in the kitchen, would now no longer go there. We fed them in the breakfast nook off the kitchen, and they would stay to the walls, get their food, eat it as quickly as possible, and leave straight away. We chose for some reason to not even store anything in the pantry, never thought about why. My fiancé's daughter kept complaining about a little girl keeping her awake at night and playing with her toys. Her daughter also complained about someone shushing her as if she were loud while playing. I came home drunk one night and was loudly getting into bed. I'm damned if someone didn't do the same to me. The weirdest part, it wasn't near me. It wasn't next to me. The sound came from my own ear. Really weird. The old stairs that went up there where the apartment is now were capped off, and you used an exit entrance sign to get up there. The medical office used it as storage, and every one of the staff had said they opened the stair door and saw a little girl atop of the staircase at least once. The basement of this place gave me the creeps any time I had to be down there. It was just storage now, where there was a 6-foot wide, hand-dug well in it, along with a tunnel that travels under the yard and into an old outbuilding. The tunnel is just dead ends now. The old building is gone and is now a self-storage place next door. No one ever made it to the far end of the tunnel. I got uncomfortable about 15 feet down. No one used it for storage either. I took a pic of some chairs down there that they were trying to get rid of or sent to someone to see if they might want them. In one of the chairs is an orb and a halo of light around the orb, sort of human-like in shape and size, just sitting in the chair. Every night from around midnight to 3 a.m, the whole place would start smelling like rotting garbage, and we never found the source. If you went outside, as soon as you were 10 to 15 feet away from the building, it would seem to dissipate. My fiancé had a friend whose mother is a medium, and after we moved, I had such a terrible experience with that move. She called her. According to her, there was an old woman still there who was a very angry person, but she liked having a family there. She preferred children to be seen and not heard. She wasn't mad at my fiancé for leaving. She was angry at my friend and I for taking them away from her. She apparently was very angry with me, as I also lived there, and we had more of a relationship, I guess. I don't think the thing that you could feel coming that appeared right at the end had anything to do with her. I have a theory about that as well. When I was little, like many little kids, I had an imaginary friend. I, however, did not like mine at all. So my friend isn't really fitting. He would set me up and get me in trouble for things. I tried to explain to my parents that it wasn't me, it was this friend, who at 4 years old I decided to call Mr. Nobody. It was a running joke for years afterwards that any time I'd done something I was getting in trouble for, maybe Mr. Nobody did it. Not my joke, mostly my parents. Now, he was around when I lived in a place a little over a year when I was 3 to 4. I'm 44 now, but what I remember about him is that he was very tall and black, like featureless black, but he was basically shaped like a person. Only I could see him, and he tended to disappear if anyone else would be able to see him. He seemed to take a lot of pleasure in screwing with me though. I was a very switched-on kid. I was in the gifted program at school and could read before I entered kindergarten. Everyone in my family always called him Nobody, so I always assumed that's what his name was. 30 years later, I found one of the little books I made when I was little. There are a few of these still floating around. They have some crappy drawing I'd done, usually when I was little, and a story I'd written to go along with the illustrations. This one didn't have any stories but just pictures I'd drawn. Partway through, I see a picture I'd drawn of a tall, scary human-shaped thing that was like all black and had glowing orange eyes. At the top of the page I'd written, Mr. Nobody. I hadn't been calling him Nobody, I'd been calling him Nobody, which even now creeps me to think about. We moved away and I never saw him again. The place we lived in is only about 8 miles from the doctor's office apartment, I think. I think he was the dread I could feel building, and was getting closer all night. I think maybe he was drawn to the disturbance, or was drawn to me being there or something. It literally scares the crap out of me to even share this. Like if I think too much about him, maybe he'll find me again. Once when I was still in school, probably elementary or middle, my mum was driving me home from something and it was dark. When we got to our street, I saw someone standing on the sidewalk in front of my neighbor's house, and that house had been known for decades to everyone that lived in it to be haunted. By whom, or whatever, they never knew. But there was one family that affectionately called one of the ghosts that opened and banged cupboard doors in the kitchen a male nickname, Bob, I think. The figure that was in front of my neighbor's house was dressed oddly, like he had come from the circus as one of the players as a rope walker. Tight blue jumpsuit with black stripes and short dark hair. His back was firmly to us and his arms were tight against his sides, but his legs were akimbo. His feet were also bare, which I thought was odd. I couldn't keep my eyes off him. He was dressed and stood so oddly, and I thought my mum saw him too. I then noticed that the man was starting to turn his head towards me, and a deep, dark dread overtook me, so I snapped my eyes away as fast as I could. My mum didn't seem to notice the guy, because she looked at me curiously. When I looked back, the circus guy was just gone. I tried to reason to myself that he just jumped off, ran off, and was too fast for me to notice him, and it had been dark. But there was enough lighting in the neighborhood to get a hazy view of pretty much every house if you stood in the right place. I guess he was just one of the ghosts around the neighborhood. It was built decades prior, and my family hadn't been the original owners. I feel presences in my own house downstairs in the hallway frequently too. I work as a kitchen porter in the top floor of a really old building, built around early to mid-1800s. The kitchen is small compared to other restaurant kitchens, but big enough to store everything and have plenty of room. Our restaurant offers a service called Tipsy Tea, where we serve you stuff you wouldn't normally get in a high tea, but in a bird cage that has 3 shelves to put the plates of food. These cages are stored on the other side of the kitchen, hanging on hooks opposite the area where I mainly work. We had a really busy rush come in, and afterwards it died down, so we were able to take a small breather before the next rush of dishes came up. I was in my area with my back to the cages, sorting out a few final things in the dishwasher when I felt something hit my leg with hard force. I turned around and looked down, and one of the bird cages was lying on the floor. At first, I thought someone threw it at me to clean it, but no one was in the area. The 2 chefs were in the walk-in fridge, which was beside my area, and the other was in the chef's area, which is again near my area. So the only way the cage could have been thrown at me was if something unseen used extreme strength to lift it off the hook and launch it across the room. To say I freaked out was an understatement, but since then, a lot of strange things have happened in that building. At least 3 individuals have died in my house, but we don't know the history prior to 1970, and the house was already 17 years old by then. I know a child perished in a house fire, a man died of an aneurysm, and his wife later died due to prescription drug overdose and flu complications. There was also a dark shadow figure I sometimes see outside the front room window, the very spot where a car once ran into our house, with me and my husband sleeping directly on the other side. The car penetrated the siding, broke the studs, and then only cracked the drywall and bent the baseboard, then just stopped. No doubt my husband and I would have died if it had come through. Does it really make sense that drywall has enough strength to stop a car that pulverized 2x4 studs? We think it was Norman. Norman shows up when someone is in the house that's upset or anxious, and the person will feel like they're getting a hug and smell the strong odor of cigarette smoke. I believe the dark things outside the window draw bad things to the house. Maybe the same thing that took Norman before his time, but now Norman keeps the bad things out. I want to tell you a story about my university, but in order to do that you must understand that this building is very old. It was first built in 1407, and it has been many things during its time, being built and rebuilt. But they say the first use of this building was to house the Spanish Inquisition. A coven of inquisitors lived here that tortured and executed heretics and those accused of insults against the faith. It did this for more than 60 years, with many famous religious figures living within its walls. But after it was dissolved, the building passed from hand to hand, being military barracks, the Provincial Monument Commission, until finally it became a university. Now, the cloisters of the university are used by hundreds of professors and students, and many of them claim to have seen apparitions. There is the rumor of the blurred figure, Some describe it as a faint white smoke, and they usually see it in the old convent, such as the cloisters and the library or the church, even the upper stalls. The white smoke, or figure, will disappear quite quickly, and is usually seen for no more than 3 or 4 seconds. A few have been able to distinguish that it looks a bit like a female figure, dressed in a wide habit. Some even say that it could be a nun. A widespread superstition among the cleaning staff is when entering a room, they would say, "Encarna, please don't scare me," and when leaving the room, would say good night to her. This is in a hope to appease the spirit. The nun's ghost is said to manifest itself in various ways too, from apparitions to moving elevators in the middle of the night, or disorganizing classroom furniture after the cleaners have finished their work in the classroom, which is why many of the university's nighttime staff, ranging from cleaners and security officers, have resigned since the university's opening. Professors rarely mention the subject, but students who graduated in the first graduating classes have no problem sharing their experiences. Most of them agree that Encarna's appearances occur during the exam periods, when the faculty opened its doors so that students could stay even later at night in the night library, as many agree that the spookiness tends to happen in the night. I myself have never seen anything, but there are many who have witnessed and experienced the hauntings of Encarna. But with such a spiritually charged place that's so ancient, I'm not surprised. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of new ghost stories for Halloween. If you did, please be sure to let me know down below. Also, as this took so long to record, raw time right now, as of recording this, is 4 hours, 47 minutes. So I'm probably not going to upload for a few days to give everyone a chance to listen. See you all in November. Thank you all for listening, and a huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names are on screen. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. So this guy who's around my age messaged me on Grindr. He seemed nice enough, and after a decent conversation I give him my number. I learned that he's new to town, and has made friends with a few people that I know since him moving to my city. After a day or two he asks if we can hang out, and I'm usually not down to meet up with anyone off Grindr, but since we had some mutual friends I decided to try it. I'm coming from my sister's cookout, and I head downtown to his place. We agreed to just drive around and talk a little bit, so I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. As we're driving, he throws out strange comments like, if we ever work out, and others. It's almost like he's trying to make it official after the first meetup, so I tell him I'm not looking for a relationship, just friendship, and that he was a really cool guy. We get back to his place, and we're sitting in his car that's turned off trying to make small talk, and he proceeds to talk to me about how he had herpes, not the kind you see on your face. At this point, a little dumbfounded, mostly because I don't know how to respond to that, he offers to go up to his room and just hang out and watch a movie. Mind you, it's like 3 AM. I said sure. We went upstairs, sat for 10 minutes, and as he was turning on the movie, he takes his pants off, and I told him I was just gonna go, and that we should hang out again soon. But I've never seen him again since, and now every now and then he pops up on my social media feed because of our mutual friends. At the age of 17, I had a chilling encounter that still haunts my memories. Picture this, an abandoned warehouse basement, the clock striking 3 AM and a group of friends by my side in that eerie atmosphere. I found myself face to face with what seemed to be none other than a demonic figure topped with a top hat. The unearthly entity locked eyes with me, standing merely a foot away. When we went to research, we discovered that a tragic incident unfolded there in the 1900s, claiming the lives of several individuals trapped in the same basement during a fire. I don't know if it's related, but I do know that I won't be going down to that basement ever again. Fort Pickens is supposedly a very haunted location. It served under different flags, including the Spanish, Confederate, and now American. There may be more, but that's not the point. The point is that this place has seen a lot of death between battles and hurricanes, which has led to its haunted reputation. I don't know how much I believe in this story, even if I'm the one it directly happened to, but I'll share it because somewhere inside me I have the nagging feeling that deep down I know it was real. My friends and I were about 13, and we were exploring the fort, and we'd come upon these small tunnels that lead to old storage areas. Now you have to understand that I was only really friends with 2 of the 4 kids there. The other 2 were my friends, but are no longer. This is important, because it contributed to me questioning the event. I decided to be brave, and said I would go down one of the tunnels while someone else went down the other. I go down about halfway without feeling anything, just thinking, hell yeah, I'm thinking I'm so cool. Yeah, I was, and still am very insecure about myself. I hit the halfway mark, and it suddenly felt like I'd hit a brick wall. It's so strange to describe. It was like an invisible barrier was stopping me, that only my body, but not my eyes, could sense. Standing there, I began to feel very fearful. Like the longer I stood there, the worse things would get. Then I saw it. A shadow figure sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall as if injured. Looking back on it, I didn't get any threatening feelings from the figure, which makes me think it could have been residual energy, like someone hiding away from intruders as they were bleeding out. I screamed. I think only because that's what I felt I had to do in this situation. That was the proper response, to scream and run, even though I didn't feel threatened or truly scared, mostly just anxious. When I emerged from the tunnel, my friends were asking what happened. When I told them, I swear I could feel their disbelief radiating off them, like a poisonous gas that sickened my stomach. I never really felt accepted in the group after that. Perhaps it's for the best. Better no company than in bad company, am I right? Growing up, my mother canned fruits and different vegetables to have fresh during the winter months. It was my job to fetch whatever she asked for. I was so nauseous just thinking about it. I would hear low voices, both male and female, as if they were overlapping conversations when heading down to the basement. Once in a great while, I might clearly hear a word here and there. A couple of times, I swore I heard my name there, but they were quite low whisperings. My parents said it was my imagination, so I never brought it up again to anyone. This was my first time telling this experience, and it honestly feels good to get it out. It certainly really scared the hell out of me. A local legend from a small town in Mexico. It's a story that parents tell kids in order for them not to stay up late. There was a man in all black, like a shadow. Everything he rides is black, his car, his horse, etc. He'll walk up to your window around 2 or 3 a.m. And if you're still up and look at him, he'll come inside and take you. But if you don't look at him and pretend to be asleep, he will eventually give up and walk away. I experienced this, and I woke up to pee and went back to bed, and then I heard rocks shifting around as if someone was walking. I didn't think much of it, till I heard it get closer to my window. Twigs snapping, grass crunching, rocks moving. I got under my covers and pretended to be asleep. I heard him grab the bars at my window and tap. I could hear him breathe. I didn't move a muscle. I don't know how long I pretended before I actually fell asleep again, and I don't know if my cousins were playing a prank or not, because the door makes a lot of noise if it's opened. Thankfully, this only happens in small towns. Back when I was 20, I worked for an office removal company called Premier Moves, which is based in Enfield, the town known for the famous Enfield hauntings in North London. We visited many times well-known companies all around the country and saw places in London that I never knew existed. This place was one of them. I started work when all of the office staff had left for home at around 7 p.m, and our job was to move one department up the next floor, and the vacant floor was for the new people that were moving in at a later date. So I had to suffer this place for 4 nights. The building was nothing to look at, just your run-of-the-mill office block. Nearby was the fabled Gherkin. As you walked on the floor, walls and even ceilings were covered in glazed tiles, exactly the same ones used on the London Underground's Bakerloo line. Dark reds, dark greens. They were really beautiful to look at and really had the wow effect. We had to put plywood on the floor to protect the floor tiles from our equipment. While we were working, a number of the staff were working overtime, and me being a history geek, struck up a conversation with a young office woman. I asked about the strange but beautiful deco, and was informed that it was once part of the original London hospital, but due to it being a Grade 2 listed building, the exterior was built around the original structure to protect it, and only the interior modifications were carpeted in the offices to protect high heels from slipping, and plasterboard on the walls to stop damage to the tiles. I was even informed that the basement was still the original morgue table, as this was a listed structure too. My duty was to operate the service lift and take equipment up and down. Me being the skinniest at the time, I was perfect for the role. The lift was small and ran in a shaft that was very similar to the old-fashioned open shaft type with stairs running around it. Very clunky, very slow and very annoying. So the night had started like any other. I was then handed the lift key, which basically meant I had full control of the elevator, which meant that no one or anything could override my operation. I was effectively a lift boy. The first 4 hours went without a hitch, operating from the 3rd level that we were working on. We stopped for a tea break an hour before the second stint of 4 hours. We started at 10, and this was when things began to get strange. So bear in mind I have the lift key. The lift decided to go to the basement level despite me pushing G on ground level. I wasn't paying attention and walked out the lift, realizing that I wasn't at the reception. When staring back at me were cream tiles and a ceramic morgue table built into the floor, complete with drainage gullies for the blood. What the hell, I wondered. Getting back in the lift, I headed back to ground level, to which I got asked why I was in the basement. After letting them know what happened, one of the porters said it had to be a glitch, to which my supervisor said, "Glitch or not, Dan has the override key, so Dan has full control, it shouldn't happen." This is my night for the next few shifts. Hit G, went to the basement. Hit level 2, the basement. And guess what happens when you hit level 1? The basement. Each time I was greeted by the morgue table and perfect cream tiles. I have to admit I started getting used to it and it became the norm. I even started saying, "Oh, back here again." During the final hours of the last day, I felt sad to believe I had come used to it. But it was definitely a peculiar experience, almost like it wanted me to visit that area.